Hello everyone, my name is Mihal, and thanks for joining me on my EGX Digital 2020 talk. Now, this talk here, this presentation, it's for all of you out there that want to get into video games marketing. So perhaps you're a student at college or at university, or maybe just doing completely something different and you just want a bit of a career change. So this chat, or this conversation, this one is for you. So I'm going to try to pass on some words of wisdom that I've picked up over the years and help you try to get through the door and try to get you that dream job. And also give you some advice for when you actually do get your dream job, how to kickstart your career in the beginning. And lastly, at the end, I'm going to leave a couple of tips for that moment where after a couple of years you might start feeling a bit of down or uncertain, or maybe you lose your confidence, or maybe you just think, what am I doing? Now I hope this feeling never comes to you, but in case it does, well, I've got some tips that help me out, get out of my personal funk, and hopefully you'll get to use them too. Well, hopefully not you won't get to use them, but just in case if you have to. So you're probably wondering, well, this is all cool and everything, but who is this guy? And that's a very fair question. So my name is Mihal, and I've been marketing games for over 6 years, and I've marketed games such as big AAA titles all the way to indies. Now, I've started my career in games back in 2013, where I worked for this company called Techland, and I had the privilege and the joy of working on my first title, which was Dying Light. I was the social media and community manager. And I worked for this company for over 2 years, and I worked on Dying Light the Following, Torment, Tides of Numenera, and lots of other little projects along the way as well. And during those 2 years, I had an absolute blast. I met some awesome people along the way. We did some really cool work that I'm really proud of. We got nominated for awards. We've even won a couple. And pretty much I had a time of my life. But after 2 years, I've decided to try something different and try something of my own. So 4 years ago, I've started my marketing agency called 3233. And for the last 4 years, I had the privilege once again to work on games such as The Sinking City, Sherlock Holmes, The Devil's Daughter, indie games like Aragami, Incolinati, and I've also helped out games like Blair Witch on Switch, and I'm working on Sherlock Holmes Chapter 1, The Medium, and I've also worked on little games here and there. So I've done quite a lot of video games, a lot of credits, and I actually love doing what I'm doing. So hopefully these little words of wisdom that I picked up, they might help you out as well, and you might get a smashing career and do even more than I have. So look, let's get into it. Let's see those tips. So first up, I thought what I might do is just to give you a bit of a breakdown on what actually is marketing. Now, I won't go too much into all of those disciplines here, but marketing is just this big, giant umbrella term for all these specialized little disciplines. So you got social media and community management, that forms part of marketing. You also have public relations, brand management, copywriting, events. There's a lot of things that fall under this whole general term of marketing. And what you'll realize is that the bigger companies out there, so your big AAA studios who have hundreds and hundreds of people working for them, and big publishers, they actually end up having either one or more people per specialty. So you'll have people who just deal with social media, or people that just deal with influencers and YouTubers, and people that just create actual strategy and plans. And then you got the other end of the spectrum, where you have indie studios who might not actually have a marketing department, or you might be that marketing department. And what will happen is, all of a sudden, all those things here, you'll be responsible for doing them yourself. Now, which way is the right way and which way is the wrong way? I think they're both right. Now, if you're someone that already has in their mind of, I'm going to be the best damn public relations person out there, that's awesome. So what I would suggest you do is actually seek a public relationship entry-level job. But if you're someone out there that's thinking, well, I love marketing, but I don't actually know what I want to do, I wouldn't mind giving a shot of everything that's out there, that's cool as well. Nothing wrong with that. So perhaps going to an indie studio or a smaller studio might be a way to do it, because one day you might be planning out social media content, and then the next moment you might be writing emails to journalists. So that's cool too. As your career moves on and as you get, better and deeper into the things in the marketing world, you might actually end up switching around. So you might go from an indie studio into a AAA, or from AAA into an indie. And you might even switch positions completely. So you might go from a social media person straight to a brand manager, or from a brand manager, you might give a shot into copywriting. That's all cool and that's great. Pretty much follow where your heart is and where the enthusiasm is taking you. So now what I want to do is actually want to give you a few tips on how to get into the industry. So I have some students are emailing me and asking me, look, how do I start getting into video games? And I've got some tips that might help you out. But one thing, these are all my opinions. I could be right, I could be wrong. My stepmom told me something interesting about opinions. She pretty much told me this: take the ones that you like and reject the ones that you don't like. So please apply that same mentality to the things that I will tell you today. Who knows? There might be some tips that will make you go, wow, this is fantastic. Or you might think to yourself, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. I hope that at least one thing will come out of it that will be of some use to you. And once again, these are just my tips. So please, I've mentioned my disclaimer. Take it however you want to take it. But look, that's enough. Let's get into those tips. So the first tip that I really want to share with you is this: experience trumps education. Now, don't get me wrong. I think going to university is fantastic. I think there's a lot of great teachers out there, a lot of great lecturers that can teach you things about marketing. And university is also great to show potential employers that, look, I actually got an education in this. I'm interested in this, and I can actually complete, projects. However, the one thing that university doesn't teach you, and experience does, is you'll really get to know or figure out how things actually work. During experience, you'll get to meet people, you will make contacts, you'll figure out little things like, how do I make the best possible schedules on Facebook? Or what's the best way to reach people on Reddit? I haven't been to uni for a lot of years, so I don't know if they are teaching you these sort of things, but I have a suspicion that they don't. So please get out there, and if you're studying right now, or even if you're doing a job, and if you want to get into marketing, have a little side gig, do some work experience on the side. Now, saying all of this, is this going to be right or wrong? I don't know, but I guess expect that for any work experience that you do, you will not get paid for it. The reason is, well, you're pretty much just a newbie. You're fresh. You only have ideas, but you don't have the know-how. But you got to start from somewhere. So be open to the fact that you might have to do some work for free. But saying all of this, if you are doing work experience that's free, go and do work experience that you are excited about. Because what it's all about is about building this portfolio of yours where you can show off and, show potential employers, look what I've done. Look at all the ideas that I've implemented. Look at all the campaigns that I executed. I've done stuff before. So that's what experience is about. So be choosy. Choose the thing that you want to do. Perhaps reach out to an indie studio and offer them your help. Or you can even do things that are not related to gaming, but still excite you. So maybe do some experience for a football club or musicians club. World is your oyster. Me personally, my first non-paid work experience gig was with TEDx. So the organization that does all the TED Talks. I've reached out to the chapter in my city, which was Perth in Western Australia. And I got to promote 2 TEDx Perth events where I ran the social media campaigns and organized other things as well. And it gave me a nice thing to show off to my potential employer. Another tip that I can give you is reach out to gaming websites. If you like to write about games, you might as well get this stuff published. This will be really good things that will help you later on if you become especially a PR person, where you can get a glimpse of how video game companies talk to journalists and what makes a journalist's job a lot easier. So give it a shot, and a lot of journalists, they become PR people too, jumping the fence pretty much. So get that experience going. My second tip for you: at first, choose video game companies or games that you would like to play yourself. It's a lot easier to promote and market something that you're really enthusiastic about, as opposed to something that you're kind of not hyped for. Now, this enthusiasm is going to help you out a lot in the beginning because you might not have experience, but you will have ideas. And if you are hyped about something, your brain is going to start bubbling with ideas that you want to implement. And that's what's going to drive you in the beginning. So reach out, make a list and reach out to the companies that you want to work first and just go down the list. Now, if you are going to be reaching out to a lot of big studios, there's probably going to be a lot of competition. So there's going to be a lot of people applying for the same job that you are. So it's important that apart from finishing your degree, you also have some experience that's going to help you stand out. So get out there and build that portfolio and reach out to those companies that you want to do work for. Now, next, when you're going to be applying for jobs, share your ideas. There's nothing more exciting than seeing a candidate that's actually got their own ideas in their head and they want to share them with the potential employer. So imagine this. You got three candidates. Candidate A, they come in and they say, hey, I've graduated from uni. I'm looking for a job. Then you got candidate B, who says, hey, I graduated from uni. I have also got some really cool work experience and I've done projects that I'm proud of. I'm looking for a job. And then imagine candidate number C, who says, I've graduated uni. I've got some really great experience and projects that I'm really proud of. And look, I really love your games and I would love to help out in building a community. I see that you're looking for a social media manager. And look, one of the things I would love to do is take care of your Discord. I feel we could do some great things with that community there. Or I would like to get the cosplayers involved and build a sense of belonging into that front. If you start sharing your ideas like that, I guarantee you that the person listening to you, they're going to have this smile on their face and they're going to keep thinking, yep, he or she is the person that we want to hire. So go in with enthusiasm and share your ideas. It's not just about things that you've already done. It's also about the things that you want to do. So show that enthusiasm, let it shine. And finally, my last little advice for all the people looking for work is listen to your gut. So if you end up graduating from uni or you end up getting all these awesome projects under your belt and you send out your resumes to all these companies and all of a sudden you got 3 studios battling for you thinking, yes, that's the person we want to hire, you might need to make a choice. And as cliche as this sounds, listen to your heart and listen to your gut. If you are stuck in between having a choice between, Studio A or Studio B, see which one feels right. And even though Studio A might be the big studio with the big game that everybody would love to do, but after talking to people at Studio B and building a bit of rapport and seeing that, yes, my ideas could be heard, you're getting that buzz inside, that's the place to go. There's nothing worse than thinking, crap, I should have chosen the other option, because that will eat you inside your head and it will be hard to get out. So follow your gut, follow your instinct everywhere and everything you do, and you'll be sweet. You will not have regrets. So those were just like a few tips that I have for people out there trying to find a job. Now I've actually got some tips for you for when you do actually get that dream job and when you start your career. These things helped me out a lot in the beginning. And I don't know if it was because I came from another country to another country and I was looking to make as many people as I can. And I was excited about the whole prospect of finding a different culture and starting my career in games. But here are some tips that might help you out. Tip number 1, get to know as many people inside the studio as you possibly can. So don't just talk to people in your marketing department. Get out there and talk to everyone. And I mean everyone. Like, speak to programmers, to level designers, to Q&A people, to concept artists, to the guys that do the sound, to the people that are involved in making business deals, to lawyers, to management, to absolutely everyone that you can meet. Speak to them and show genuine interest and build a friendship with them, a relationship with them. Because what will happen is you will realize that when you start speaking to them, they will tell you a lot of things that you would never think of or even players would never notice about the game that you are working on. Now, one thing that I realized is these people are artists and they're leaving a little bits of themselves inside the game. So there were moments where people would leave their own photos inside games, inside levels, or some of the writers would base some of the stories based on their own experiences. And to me, that's fantastic fodder. That's awesome ammunition to use so you can communicate back to the players. So this is going to sound really cheesy, but pretty much your job is to be this transistor between the artist and the consumer or the player. And your job is to transist that love from the artist and then show that love to the player. And that is what you are there to do, to transist love. people will react to it positively, especially players. They'll look at these things and go, wow, I've never looked at it this way, or I never thought this was what it meant. And all of a sudden, you're making this game being bigger than what it is. So be that transistor of love and share that thing in between. Remember, we are marketers. We don't sell features, we sell emotions. So get to know those emotions. Now, my second tip that I have for you is think like the players. Do it for them. Now, if you work in video games or you want to work in video games, I assume that you play video games yourself, and I assume that you're pretty passionate about them, and you might be following some studios or games on social media platforms, or read about them in the press, and you have a sense of, what's nice and what's not nice. And I guess at first, it's good to develop this mentality of, look, I'm a player, what would I love to see from a game? And that mentality creates awesome content for you. So you think to yourself, well, what would I like? What I would like for a company to do this, or I would like for the game to show me that. Do it. That's your ammunition right there for content. And what will happen is this enthusiasm and this love of this is what I want players to see because I'm one of them. You'll actually start seeing that people reciprocate that, and they'll go, wow, they're showing me things that I always wanted to see. This is great. This is awesome. And all of a sudden, you'll start seeing love coming back to you. And that will just keep you burning and keep that fuel going. So please, I know you have a boss, and probably your boss might even have a boss, but do think about the players because you're doing this stuff for them. My third tip that I have for you, don't be afraid to experiment. I don't know who said this. All I know is it was an actor. I forgot the name of the person. But what they said is that we live in this world of social media, and the only thing that we see is the victories. People only post about the good things that happen to them. So we only show success, we only show victories, we only show the good stuff that we're proud of. But we never show failures. Thing is, you will most likely fail, and you will probably fail a lot. And failure hurts. It can become a personal thing. But the thing is, you can't avoid failure. So experiment. Always try to think of something new. Always try to think of doing something different. Because when you experiment and try new things, that's when great new things come about. Because a thing is only new when it hasn't been done before. If someone already done it, then you're just replicating what someone else has did. So try to come up with new ways, new things, new experiments. And look, just be prepared that you will fail. Sometimes experiments don't work. I mean, I tried so many times to do certain things and it didn't work out the way intended, but it's okay. You just dust yourself off and you go again. So don't be afraid to experiment. You might fail. But if you don't experiment and you don't try new things, then you will definitely fail because you will just stagnate. And no one likes a stagnant pancake. So get out there and be, okay to fail and experiment. A little tip that I can pass on to you is look at what other companies and what other marketers are doing as well. There's this whole world of inspiration that's just waiting for you. And not just in games. Gaming is cool. But I suggest you even go outside of gaming and check out what other industries are doing. See what Hollywood is doing. There's some awesome marketing campaigns for movies happening. Same with football clubs, sport, music, hacking group, Internet of Things. There's just amazing stuff happening out there. NASA. So get out there, get out of that bubble and see what the rest of the world is doing. Because what will happen is you'll get inspired and you'll start thinking, oh wow, I really love what this football club did. Maybe I can do something similar for us, for our fans. So you take that idea, you mix it up, you change it to make it your own. And all of a sudden this cross-pollination of ideas comes about and new things come about and you start experimenting and you do fantastic things that people have never seen before. So get out there, get out of the bubble. Bubbles are cool, but outside of the bubble is even better. So be inspired. And don't worry, it's not a competition. You're not competing against anyone. Next little tip. I'm still trying this personally myself to get over it, but Learn how to sell your ideas and write short emails and short pitches. No one has time to read your 5,000 word paper on why you should do Facebook bots. It's not that people don't like you, it's just that people don't have time. People are busy, they got their own crap that they need to finish. They're not going to squeeze in your 5,000 word email to see why we should do a certain thing. So if someone doesn't read your documents, don't take it personally. It's not that they don't like you, it's just that they don't have time. So what I suggest you do, have that idea, condense it into a couple of words, paragraph sentences, and people will just open it up, read it, okay, that makes sense, let's do it. So write short, be respectful of other people's time. And lastly, my little tip, don't be overprotective of your ideas. When I first started, and there's a couple of people, other friends of mine that I know, when we first started in marketing, we were very overprotective of our ideas. It's almost like an idea was an extension of your own person, mind. It was like your baby. And if someone said something negative about your idea, it was like, oh my God, I can't believe they said this, they must hate me. No one hates you. If someone doesn't like your idea, it doesn't mean that they think you stink. It doesn't mean that you think that they're crap or that you're incompetent. It just means that they don't like your idea. And that's fine. Because who knows, maybe that idea is correct, but the timing is wrong. I sometimes waited 1.5 years to implement an idea. So don't take it personally. It's not an insult. And the best thing about ideas, what I found the best part about ideas, is the best ideas are usually the ones that involve a couple of people. So imagine you throw an idea out into the room and another person might go, hey, that's actually pretty cool. And we could also do this and this with it. And then a third person might say, yeah, and I remember reading about something else. We should try that out in that idea too. And all of a sudden you got this one little idea that's coming bigger and bigger and bigger. And you got this one grandiose idea that people are involved in and they're excited to try it out. So share your ideas. Don't be overprotective of them. It's not your child. It's not you. It's just an idea. Don't get personal. Those were just some of the tips that helped me out in the beginning of my career. And now I want to share you a couple of tips with you for when you might get a bit of a dark night of the soul, as I like to call it. So maybe in a couple of years after you started working, you might start getting this little blind spot in your mind and you're trying to figure out that something is wrong. You don't know what it is. Maybe I'm angry. Maybe I'm upset. Maybe I'm over it. Maybe I'm just not good at what I'm doing. These thoughts pop out. But the thing that you have to remember is it's okay to have these thoughts. Because if you're getting these thoughts that something is wrong, it's just your mind or your body telling you, hey, we need to fix something up. So I've got a couple of tips that might help you out when you're going through a bit of a negative funk in your life. Tip number 1 that I have, always keep learning because things always change. Now, I remember I lost my confidence about 2 years ago. Yeah, about 2 years ago. When I started noticing that the things that I learned in the beginning of my career no longer worked later on on the projects that I worked on. And that was shattering. That was nuts. I remember I was doing posts on Facebook that were getting such great results, and now no one's listening to them, And that kind of made me feel really bad inside. It made me think, wow, am I actually good at this, or do I actually know what I'm doing? I'm starting to see online all these other marketers, going, check this out, what we've done. Yay, this is awesome. Wow, celebrations. And on my end, I'm down. And it's fine. It's okay. And it wasn't okay. So I got very down and I lost my confidence. But then I realized something. You gotta keep learning. Because if something is not working, if something doesn't work anymore, it probably means that there's something else out there that actually does work. So for every door that closes, an opportunity comes about. It's actually true. So always look out, always keep learning, always polish up your skills, and always try to be curious about some new things that are coming out. For me, it was Steam actually that got me out of my funk. I realized that Facebook, they were cutting on organic reach. A couple of years ago, you did a post, it would reach to many people. But now Facebook, if you want to reach people or your fans, you got to pay them. So they've cut organic reach. So I've started looking at other methods to reach the community that's interested in our games. And that's when Steam came about and changed my life and saved me. So my next tip is specialize if you can, or don't. I'm a firm believer that you can't master everything. Now, as I was showing you the whole different spectrum of marketing that you can do, there's just no way you can master everything. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with not being a master of marketing. So what I do suggest is specialize in something and go with your gut and your instinct and go after what you really are interested in. So specialize in that field. And like for me, personally, there's no way I'm ever going to beat all these black magic magicians that know how to do Facebook ads or SEO. I have no idea how to use the algorithms. I don't know how to get the most out of these paid ads. And that's fine. I don't need to know because they're doing that job. Me, on the other hand, I feel I'm pretty good at communication and I've got my own specialties that I'm pretty good at, and I feel I can plan a damn good campaign too. That's what drives me, that's what I like, and I guess that's what people reach out to me for. So specialize if you can and go with your instinct and choose what you want to do. Tip number 3 is take time off. Now for me, I feel that this is a big one. If there's one thing that I can pass on to the new generation of marketers, so to all the people that are graduating soon and coming into this industry, is please take time off. I don't know why, but this industry, like the concept of crunch seems to be acceptable. The idea of working 10 hours a day for months at a time, even on Saturdays and sometimes Sundays, seems like it's a normal thing to do because there's a video game to be released. That's not normal, that's stupidity. And what will happen is this head in here, this brain, that's your biggest asset. That's what generates ideas. And to generate ideas, you need juice. And the more you work and the more you think and the more you ideate, the more juice you use up. The way to replenish juice is by taking time off. So please don't go to bed and check your work emails. Don't come after work and keep doing more work. What will happen is when you keep draining that juice and there's nothing left, you'll start becoming agitated. You'll start becoming angry. You will start hating the job that you do. What will happen is all this negative emotion will start manifesting itself physically and you'll start or might even go ill. So please take the time off, take weeks off, and I hope that you never have to do crunch again. Just don't accept it. So that's my tip for you. Take time off and replenish that juice. And lastly, share your knowledge with others. No matter how big or small, whatever you've picked up, share it with other people. Because the more you share your knowledge, the more you realize that people actually come back to you and ask for more. And it makes you feel good and makes you feel confident. I've just started recently sharing my knowledge. And it's a confidence thing. And I highly recommend you do that too. Not only are you making other people greater and better at their work, actually sort of make yourself look like an expert. So share your knowledge, share that wealth of info, and make others better at what they do. Now, so that's the end of my tips and my presentation. But what I wanted to do, I actually wanted to give you a free presentation DLC. And this DLC is book recommendations. Now, I can't get enough of books. I think books are crazy. They're awesome. There's just so much knowledge out there. So I want to give you 3 books that I feel that you should read. They're definitely going to help kickstart your career. So here's a little list of books for you. Book number 1, Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. This is an awesome book that tells you all about ideas, how to generate them, to step out of your bubble and look at other places to get that inspiration. It tells you how to record ideas, how to keep a journal. The book is great. It's got pictures in it. Come on, that's awesome. So please take a look at it, read it. It will help you out in the beginning of your career. Book number 2, The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon. Now, fair enough, this is pretty hardcore. This is a very intense book, but this book talks about how people in crowds behave differently than as an individual. And as a marketer, you'll be communicating with a lot of crowds. So trying to get to know them and figure out how crowds work is going to help you build messaging. So get it out there, get that book, have a read. And what's crazy about it is it's been written over 150 years ago and it's still relevant today as it was before. So it's one of my favorites. And lastly, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. A lot of people, I feel they got different opinions about this book. I'm a huge fan of it. It helped me with my social anxiety, helped me open up to people. And it's not some book which teaches you to manipulate people's minds. No. It teaches you how to relate to people and make connections. So simple things like mentioning a person's name that you speak to. It gives them familiarity and feel like, okay, this person understands me. So Bethany, James, Raul, get that book, give it a read. It's going to benefit your life. So give it a shot. So those are my 3 book recommendations. There's others out there. Malcolm Gladwell, I love him. Tipping Point, fantastic book. What else do we have? Seth Godin, Simon Sinek, Edward Bernays, grandfather of public relations. You gotta find out who the old school G's were. Give it a listen and also sign up for all these blogs, Twitter accounts, YouTube channels. There's a lot of knowledge to consume. So this is the end of my presentation. I hope that you really liked it. And look, if you've got any questions, don't be afraid. Reach out. I'm on Twitter. I also have an email address, I guess like everyone else does. And believe it or not, I actually have a YouTube account. So I do YouTube videos that talk about video games marketing, and I share my video games marketing knowledge with others out there. So take a look. Maybe something will catch your eye. But this is it from me. Thank you so much for listening to my chat. Look, I hope it brought some new perspectives for you, and perhaps these tips will be of some use. Get out there. Video games marketing is a fantastic field to be in, and I hope that you'll get a fulfilling career, and I know that you'll enjoy the heck out of it. So thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.
Game begin.
What on earth is a global digital event, I hear you ask? Well, allow me to enlighten you. This event is a gathering of hot gaming content that you would have been able to see at PAX West in Seattle, PAX Australia in Melbourne, or EGX in London in September, before COVID changed the world in what, let's be honest, is a storyline from a video game. In fact, it's bound to spawn many post-viral games in the near future. We'll be hunting through the city streets, crafting masks from animal hides, and all while still on furlough. Instead, you can sit at home and take in all the delights of a truly global event, enjoying the food from your kitchen at a reasonable price, and have a seat guaranteed, all day. Amazing! At this event, you'll be able to poke around over 200 booths on the show floor, and have a deep dive into some great curated content you might not have seen before. And it's all in one place, like a show. Just have a click around and discover stuff, then click further and discover more stuff. The show floor, or Expo Hall if you're speaking American, is just part of the event we're presenting. On top of the Expo Hall, we also offer you some of the highlights of any PAX or EGX show. Tons of brilliant panels. You'll be able to visit the site, paxegx.com, and navigate your way via the show floor to the massive schedule. It's like a Glastonbury festival of gaming, with massive headline acts and loads of interesting things to watch in the meantime. There will always be something great in there just for you. The Daily Wrap from Virgin Media, presented at 5:30 UK time each day. This will be brought to you by a mix of the brilliant teams at Outside Xbox and Outside Extra, Eurogamer, and Rock Paper Shotgun. They'll highlight the hotspots from the show day that's just happened and look forward to what's coming up next, all using boss-level broadband for gamers. Meet up on Discord. We all know that hanging out with your friends is a really important part of going to an event. Meeting people you already know, making new friends, and hanging out. The Left Field Collection is a must-see for attendees looking for the new, unique, and challenging works going on in games. This is a platform for titles and projects that like to do things a little differently, and promises to always have something interesting to check out. With over 100 indie titles at this year's show, there's going to be tons to discover. There are loads of other features, including speedrunning, cosplay, some interesting limited edition retail opportunities, and board games, with loads of videos from our partners at Dicebreaker. Exclusive event merch! What with this being the first time we've done a standalone digital event, this merch will be very limited edition. Show off to your friends with a fetching new hat at a distance of 2 meters or greater, or grab something special for a loved one or hated enemy. The shop's live now, and you can find it on this site or by searching for the EGX store. And if it's PAX merch you're after, you can search for that too. That's a taste of what to look out for while you're strolling around the digital show floor. There's loads of hot gaming content to come over the next few days. Some of it's live now, and some will be going live later, so be sure to check out all the booths to find out more. Oh, and don't worry if you miss a panel. Everything is going to be uploaded soon after to the EGX YouTube channel. But, you know, always better to see it first, right? In the meantime, here are some of the things to keep an eye on.
Hi, I'm Ollie Welsh, editor of Eurogamer, and this is our list of the games of the generation. Joining me, I've got Eurogamer contributor and games critic extraordinaire Melindy Hetfeld, Eurogamer features editor Christian Donlan,
Hiya.
and Eurogamer staff writer Chris Tapsell.
Hello.
All from our homes, obviously, in these strange times. Now, first up, games of the generation, how do we define that? We went for a very, very simple definition. It's basically anything released on any format since November 2013, when a PlayStation 4 and Xbox One were released. But we fully include Switch, we include mobile, we include PC. Anything anybody wanted to nominate was fair game for this list. Now, we made the list a little bit differently to the way we've done these kind of things before. We just last year did a Games of the Decade list. Obviously, we felt there was going to be quite a lot of crossover there. And we also wanted to get a different perspective, because we usually curate these lists ourselves on Eurogamer, and we thought, what would happen if we asked a few other people who know what they're talking about, what they thought the Games of the Decade were. So we put together a panel of 19 game developers, journalists, and critics, including people like Ralph Fulton, who's the creative director at Playground Games, Jason Schreier, a reporter at Bloomberg, formerly of Kotaku, Rhianna Pratchett, the writer on the recent Tomb Raider games, Derek Yu, the creator of Spelunky, and Keza MacDonald, the games editor of The Guardian. Because we wanted to talk to them, we wanted to get out of our bubble a bit and see what the consensus was on the games of the last 7 years. Funnily enough, there was only consensus about a very small number of the games. Really, only the top 2 or 3 got votes from a substantial number of people on the panel. After that, you had a huge variety of picks getting 1 or 2 votes each, and that's why we're focusing on a top 10 only. So we're going to talk about the top 10 games ranked in this video. If you go to the site, to Eurogamer, there'll be an article on the top 10. There'll be a second article on some of the other picks, because there was a fascinating range of nominees and lots of things that I would never have thought of coming in from our panelists that I think will be well worth checking out. And I think actually this list is more diverse and less mainstream than the one we'd have made ourselves if we did it as Eurogamer, and has a number of quite surprising omissions, I guess you would say. That said, I do think the top 2 games would have come out in the top 2 positions on almost any poll of the games for the last generation. So with that preamble done, let's get started. And the number 10 game, and I was a little surprised this didn't come out higher, is The Witcher 3. Ralph Fulton from Playground said of this, "It took me 3 attempts to properly get into, but then so did The Wire, a masterpiece." And I like that comment because I thought The Wire was a fairly apt comparison, like a huge, sprawling, peak TV magnum opus. I think was a pretty fair comparison for The Witcher 3. Rich, Chris, I know you've played The Witcher a bit. What do you reckon?
Which Chris? This one?
Yes, sorry. I will refer to Christian as Donlan at all times, as is standard.
That's quite right. Yeah, I love it. I mean, a bit like Ralph, I think it took me a couple of tries and I kind of bounced off it. And so I think my latest attempt, I'm sort of in the sort of teens of hours in it, rather than really smashing my way the entirety through the massive game that it is. I think what stood out to me with The Witcher is that when it came out, everyone described this game as the first next-gen game of the console cycle. And most of the time that was because of the size of it and the kind of the scope of it. It was this massive game, and no one had played a game that big before, open world, attractive, well-presented game of that size. But now, I think looking back, we've got loads of games that are bigger than The Witcher, but none of them have matched it for kind of the quality of its writing and the nuance of it obviously there are times where it can feel a little bit kind of nihilistic and that sort of thing, but really just in terms of the groundedness of it as an open world game compared to a lot of others, that's what makes it stand out, and that's what makes it feel like a game of the generation, not just its size.
I absolutely love this game, and I actually recently returned to it and started the second playthrough, which is remarkable, not just for a game of this length, which I'd already sunk like something ridiculous like 170 hours into, but also a game that I reviewed, and I don't often return to games that I review. But I just really enjoy its world, and it's a strange thing to say because the world is quite downbeat, it's quite gritty. But there is something grounded about it, as you say, and there is something more fully realised about it. Not than any narrative or any characters in games, but in something of this scale, I think it has. I don't know. It has a lot of colour, and it really fulfills that fantasy of being a monster hunter for me. The idea of like going out there, getting your contract, making your preparations, studying your quarry, and going out there and getting it. So yeah, I love it. I do love it. Donlan, you're not such a big fan of it, are you?
I've played the opening twice, and then I just realised I wasn't going to play the rest of it. And I'm sure it is brilliant, but I played the opening twice, and I wasn't able to see what exactly it was really good at. It seemed to be brilliant at a lot of things, but I wasn't able to see the sort of the things it did that was really special. And at the time when I was asking other people, like, what am I sort of waiting for? What would this game do? And no one could really answer. It seems, I think it just sort of works its way in over time. I'm sure it's brilliant. I had 2 turns to bounce off it, and I was just like, I'm bounced now. I'm done.
It's one thing I will say is not an amazing game mechanically. Like as an RPG or as an action combat game, it's sort of fine. I quite like some of the character development, but it's pretty imprecise. It doesn't give you the sort of deep systems that you might get in another game. But yeah, Melinda, have you played The Witcher?
Yeah, I've played The Witcher, but I've had the same problem that I've had, a lot of people remark on, which is literally just the opening. Like, I think I've needed 2 solid tries to get past that and actually get into the game. And also, I don't like The Witcher. Just played it because everyone said that's the game you needed to play, and I really didn't like The Witcher 1 or 2 at all. And everyone said, oh no, but if you don't play this one, you'll have missed something. And I was like, yeah, but I don't really know what's going on, and can I really get into that? And then at some point it just clicked, and I played 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 and I played. And then what really always sticks with me when I try to explain what's so good about The Witcher 3 is that I think it's the game that most people talk about when they talk about good side quests, and side quests that you actually remember, because there's a lot of RPGs where you just mop up all the side quests and you have this big list, and then you look into your map and you see, oh, there's someone there that needs something, and then just let me go over there and deliver that sort of thing, and you don't really remember what it was. But here, every time I did something, it was not only that I wasn't necessarily done in one go, there and back, but also that it sort of had a quality to it that actually made me remember the people that I was talking to, and what they wanted me to do. And I've never really worked out what it is, what's different about that, but the sheer size of a side quest sometimes is quite astounding to me, and I still think
it's the fact they have so many side quests in it, and they almost all feel like stories the developers actually wanted to tell, rather than just being, we need an excuse to get the player a bit of experience and to get them to visit this bit of the map. I think that's pretty remarkable and amazing achievement from CD Projekt. Let's move on to our next game. Now, I was really surprised when this one cropped up because I hadn't thought about it in years, although I was also delighted because it is amazing. It's the only mobile game in our top 10, and it is Threes. And on this, Jason Schreier said, puzzle perfection. I have probably spent more time playing threes than any other game in my life, and I've spent like 500 hours on Destiny. And Jason linked through to a tweet where he calculated that on an average game time of 5 minutes, he must have played threes for about 1,800 hours. Granted, most of that time was while riding the subway or watching TV with my wife, but still the new Tetris, as far as I'm concerned. Donna, you've played threes, right?
Yeah, oh God, it's amazing. It's amazing. Everyone should read Wes's Game of the Year piece from a while back, which is a terrifying insight into Wes. I think it's really interesting that Jason and Wes both really like this game. It's clearly, I mean this in the best sense, but like it must be a game for sharks. There must be something quite sort of satisfying about closing in on those numbers. It's what fascinates me about threes every time I play it is just how simple the controls. It's 4 directions.
Yeah, it's just swiping, isn't it? So if you haven't played the game, you can probably see from the footage that's running now, but you have numbers in a grid and you swipe left and right, and that sort of pushes the numbers into each other to make bigger numbers. And that's it. But it's just a hugely compelling game. I remember it was also like, it was one of the most cloned games ever. Like within a month, there were like hundreds of versions of threes on the App Store.
But actually, now that some people have actually started to do really interesting things with it, there's one clone, which I will not remember the name of, but which it turns into a dungeon crawl, and it's really excellent. And it's just different enough to make you feel actually they've taken something. They're not pretending they've never heard of threes. They're like, oh, what if threes was this? And it feels like that's the next step where people like build on something in a way that's actually quite generous and sort of admits where it came from.
Yeah. I think there's a brilliant case for this being on this list just because it's one of those few like absolutely perfect pieces of design that you come across like once every 10 years or so. So I'm really happy to have it there. Do download it and try it out if you haven't tried it already. So at number 8 in the list, we have Nier Automata. Automato.
Automata.
You know when you realise that you've never actually said the title of a game out loud, you've only ever typed it in Slack. On this, Rami Ismail, who at the time I emailed him about a month ago was the head of a studio called Vlambeer, a great studio. That studio sadly no more, just announced its closing I think last week, and they're all moving on to different things. Anyway, Rami said, Nier is a staggeringly difficult game to describe, but stubborn would probably be the best word to use. It is sincere and stubborn, as you'd expect from a creator like Yoko Taro, but it is tempered by the experience in smooth action gameplay at Platinum Games. The result is indescribable, a game about games that is both a love song and a scathing rebuke. Yeah. That's good stuff. Melindy, you're the Nier, well, the person with Nier experience out of the 4 of us, because the rest of us haven't played it.
I think actually calling it stubborn is a good way to describe it, but it's not a good quality in my book. Like I was really surprised that this did so well, because the Automata is kind of the JRPG that exemplifies so many things that people hate about JRPGs or Japanese games, without actually being like a classic turn-based JRPG. Because for one, it's incredibly long, and if you want to find out what's so good about it, you have to, keep playing it past the end, and then past that end, and then past that one. And the fact that it achieves, to hook you to actually stick with the game for that long, just to find out what's different about it when you keep playing it. I think it's quite an achievement. But there's so many things like, it doesn't actually look that good, and it takes a while to get used to the different mechanics that you have, because you have so many different sort of small games in one game. They're really interesting to play, but you need to be on your feet all the time, because now you're playing hack and slash, and now you're playing like a bullet time shooter thing. And the first time I thought it was extremely confusing, but also you wanted to see what comes up next, and what is there to see. And sort of same thing goes for the story, I think, because the impulse is like, oh my god, none of this makes sense, and then you play it for a while and then like, oh no, this is actually quite clever. And I never would have thought that people would hail it the way that they did, but I think it's a good benchmark for Japanese games, or for what we think of Japanese games in general, and how to challenge that.
Yeah, I think it's a game that's much loved by critics. I think because critics always love a game that subverts your expectations, don't they? And they as much as they like to complain about really long games because they're a pain to review, they do also, critics like games that reward your time and that do give you more the more you play them. And this game is like famous for that, isn't it? Like you just keep playing past multiple endings, and it just keeps getting deeper and as I understand it, and richer the more you play it. So yeah, that one was quite popular. Actually, had quite a few nominations on that list. Number 7 on the list is Slay the Spire. And so this is a deck building roguelite, I guess you would describe it. Eric Walpole, who's a writer at Valve, is one of the lead writers on the Portal games, said, according to Steam, I've played this for 875 hours. And that's not including the many hours I spent happily in probably watching people play it on YouTube. At this point, I can pretty confidently state that I will never get tired of it. There's a part of me that's ashamed to admit this simple-looking deck builder is probably my favourite game ever, but the numbers don't lie. I know a lot of people who really love Slay the Spire. I have played it. I liked it. I thought it was, I could see just the perfect meshing of its sort of roguelike sort of dungeon delving structure with the deck building aspect of the game. But it didn't super grab me. Donnan, you played it as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I think I reviewed it. I really, really like it, but I don't think I ever loved it. And I think part of the problem was, I think with CCG, if you're not like a CCG person, the chances are the first CCG you play ends up being your favorite. And Hearthstone was that, and I put all of my CCG love into that one game. And then when Slay the Spire came out, I actually think it's probably a better game than Hearthstone. It's certainly a fairer game because you get all the cards in there, and I really like what it does. But by that point, I was just a little bit out of genuine love for the genre. So I was able, you just go, I know this is really good. This is really excellent. But it's not for me at this moment. When you look at Bertie on our staff, loves it, absolutely adores it. And there's always a thing with CCGs that I'm too thick for them. Do you know what I mean? Like you have to be pretty smart to play them. And I think Bertie particularly got the right head for this, for the sort of comboing cards and everything like that, and seeing new things, the way things come together. But I think it's wonderful. It's just personally, I don't have that actual spark for it. I
will go back to it one day. A friend of mine just pointed out to me that it's on iOS now, which may be the perfect home for it on your phone. Because it's a game that I know that I ought to love. That I don't know what it was. I found, I guess my problem with CCGs is I struggle often just to keep the cards in my head, to remember what they are and what they do.
Yeah, and when you're talking about deck builders, so like the only deck builder I've ever had real fun with is Clash Royale, and it's because there's 8 cards in your deck, and I can get my head around that, But when there's like 30, the possibilities are just too. It's just too vast. That's what I mean by being too thick for it. For me, it's just my brain is so tiny, and here's this huge world of potential, and I short circuit on it.
Chris, Melindy, have either of you played this one?
I'm so scandalized right now. I never would have thought that neither of you are into it as much as I am. I love it so much. It is such a dangerous game. It is like the perfect game to just exemplify that the Switch is actually the devil machine, because now that it's on Switch, it's literally all I play. And I don't know if this is me just not being very good at the game, but I know that when I put on Slay the Spire, I probably won't be playing it for hours and hours. At least that's what I tell myself. because I will probably, just die after a few rounds, and then I tell myself, yeah, that's what's supposed to happen because this is a roguelike, so this is okay. It's okay to never make it to the end. It's fine. It's fine. But actually, I do a few rounds, and then I immediately I do it again. I can't. And the thing about this is, it's the same as with Into the Breach. I will probably just sit there and stare at the cards for a very long time to see the combos and think of a good way to do it. And then as soon as I've done something, I'll probably think, oh no, that's wrong. Something different. And just the fact that I can do this every time I play it should be horrifying to me. Of the whole thing entirely, but I love it so much because there's literally not been one round where I did the same thing as the one before, because there's no one card that you always have in your deck that will, immediately help you win, or the one character that has all the good cards that you've unlocked. And I've played this for about 50 hours on PC and another 50 on Switch, which is a lot for me. It's not thousands of hours, but it's already a lot for me. And that time has just been, let's put this on for, let's say, 5 minutes, and just sit there for hours and play it, and you can't help yourself. And I think the fact that they've done this with a relatively small amount of cards, not only in your hand, but generally the number of cards you can unlock is to me quite fascinating, and because I can't work out how any of this works or why I keep playing it, and that's what I like, not being able to look into it, criticize it in any useful way.
That is an amazing feat of design, actually. If you played it that much and you don't repeat yourself in what you're doing, it shows they've got something right there. Also, I love that thing you describe of a game that makes you just sit there and stare at the board for an hour. Like you mentioned, Into the Breach, a brilliant example of that. The game for me that did that for me this generation was Invisible Ink, a tactics game by Clay, which I'd spend like, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes planning my next move just so that it all was executed perfectly.
There's something about games that I was just going to say about games that hide the fact that they are puzzle games behind something else. So Into the Breach is one when it looks like a tactics game. Similarly, Invisible Ink and in like ways. It sounds like I've never played this. I've never played Sense 5, but it sounds like it's the same thing of hiding a puzzle-solving mechanic behind a layer of another genre that immediately makes it so much more compelling. So that's the first time I've sounded really. Someone said something that's made me seem really interested in playing this game. So that sounds nice.
Cool. Let's move on to the next. Something very different next at number 6. It's Uncharted 4, A Thief's End, to give it its subtitle. Dan Marshall, the developer at Size 5 Games, says, "I'm a sucker for gold in a jungle. Any story about gold and some jungle and hopefully an old map, and I am all in. Uncharted 4 was just breathtaking from start to finish. I blitzed through it for no other reason than that I simply didn't have the necessary willpower to stop playing. Amazing performances and set pieces, and enough gold and jungle bits to tickle my adventure thrill bones. Perfect." I played this, I reviewed it, I liked it. I wouldn't say I'm a fence sitter on Naughty Dog. I like their games. I don't love them with an intense passion, but I really appreciate the craft of them, and I appreciate how smoothly they go down, and how sort of well worked out they are. And this was like, I can understand why it's on top of this. This is, I guess this game is the reason why we did this list this way, which is that I don't think it would come up in a poll of Eurogamer writers as a favourite. But it's a really important game and in a really important genre to a lot of people. And so that's why we wanted to sort of step outside of our bubble. That said, about the bubble, we did like choose people that we know and like to do this. So there's still definitely some selection bias involved. Chris, have you played this one?
I haven't. So I played the first 3 Uncharted games and the Vita one, Golden Abyss. I think I'm similar to you in that I like them. I think that they're as people always describe them, pulpy, very digestible games. I think they are all of them about 30% too long. And I've heard that 4 is a similar kind of thing, and that the sort of spin-off one that they did that for some reason I'm forgetting the name, Lost Legacy, yeah, yeah, I've heard that's more. It was what the length that I would personally choose for a game like that. I think that there's an element of Uncharted, especially, and Naughty Dog games, especially, being sort of games, in the sense that they are always incredible technical achievements. They're always very beautiful for the time that they come out. The action is pretty stunning, and then we saw that again. We saw the evolution with The Last of Us 2. I think there's always going to be an element of just, if you work in, especially something like games which is very technical, as well as being artistic, and is very chaotic, and every game is sort of a miracle in its own right. When you have a game that is so smooth and so well polished and and also entertaining, and just a good ride, is good fun and has sort of enjoyable writing and performances from some of the biggest names.
Funnily enough, I think Naughty Dog will always do what they do, and they'll always do it incredibly well. I don't think it is. I think at one time it's what people thought the future of games was, and it's also a vision that's quite specific to PlayStation, to Sony, and to what they think is important. They love storytelling. They love relatively photoreal or very sort of filmic looking games. If you look at some of their other games this generation, like God of War. So I think it's kind of a very specific PlayStation vision for what mainstream games could be. I think the general vision has diverged from that over the course of this generation. People have got more interested in just these sort of sprawling open world games, and where story wouldn't necessarily follow a linear path, and then over the course of the generation, more and more in social online games that didn't really deliver any of that. But there's still a place for it. And I think what I appreciated most about Uncharted 4, apart from just how slick and how fun it was and how pretty, was that it was a game that was willing to end. I mean, like you say, Chris, it did take its time to get there, and had about 3 force endings because Naughty Dog can't help themselves. But then it was done, and they left pretty much no route back for Nathan Drake as well at the end of it. And I thought that was quite brave for such a successful series to basically say, right, we are actually done with this now. I'm not saying there's never going to be another Uncharted. Well, there was another Uncharted game like a year later with the spin-off, but I thought they did well to conclude the story really firmly, I guess, without having to do anything shocking either, but just by developing the character to the point where that was it. He was done. It's nice to see that. It's nice to see that in a world where we're facing the prospect of watching Harrison Ford play Indiana Jones at the age of 80. It's just like, just maybe just leave it. Not a problem for Nathan Drake, because he's not real, but apparently Naughty Dog were willing to retire him anyway. So let's go to number 5. This is a surprising game to see on the list in a different way, and it is Titanfall 2. And we're going to go back to Rami for this one, because Rami's quotes are amazing. Rami says, Titanfall 2 is a genuine tour de force by a developer that had everything to lose and everything to prove. Even years after release, the game holds up in terms of action design, and it is still staggering in how varied and diverse the gameplay is, how well the narrative and the mechanics intersect, and how genuinely good everything feels. Chris, you like this one, right?
Which Chris? That Chris.
Both of you.
Donald, you go. We both love it. But
yeah, I love this game. I think it's amazing. And I think looking at this list made me think, and I don't want to spoil what else is on the list, but like looking at this and Uncharted 4 on this list made me think, God, I really don't value craft enough, And there's a really interesting David Hockney was talking about the Arnold Feeney portrait, which I love, and he was saying artists when art critics look at it, they're obsessed with like the mystery and the meaning and, you know, what's going on, what's the point he's trying to get across. But when artists look at it, they go, that chandelier, the foreshortening on it is really good and there's no underpainting, so did it in one go. And I think it is worth remembering that craft is something in itself. And in craft in the Naughty Dog game, Uncharted, I find slightly alienating just because everything is so perfect. Everything looks so perfect. But in Titanfall, which actually, weirdly, I don't think the art direction is that wonderful, but the feel of it is just, they have absolutely aced how everything feels. And then in each level, they mess around with it in an ingenious, playful way. There's a level that people talk about all the time, and they say it's almost like a Mario level. You know, it's almost like Mario as a shooter. But for me, it's a game with the perfect middle eight. And there's a bit just like towards the end where you get, this is a spoiler, but you get the smart pistol back, and it takes you on this rampage where you don't really have to do anything, but everything you do just feels so good. It's an extraordinary game for making you feel good. And my wife came in while I was playing it towards the end of it, and you start off and everyone's like, oh, you're just a nobody, you're not going to be able to pilot a big robot. And by the end of it, everyone is so over the moon with how well you're piloting this big robot. Whenever you turn up, they just constantly cheer. And every scene has just a bunch of people going, oh, you and that robot are brilliant, you know. And Sarah was like, what the hell are you playing? Just like, I was sitting there with the controller and a load of people were just sort of screaming, you know, applause at me. And it's a very simple trick, but it does work, you know. Good game.
Yeah. I don't know how I follow that, because that was perfect. But I think for me, it's the first first-person shooter since Halo 3 and Call of Duty 4, First Modern Warfare, that has given you that feeling of generosity from the developers, right? Of just letting you have things to play with and go, oh, like, have a rocket launcher, have a mech suit, have this, have that. Like, ultimately, you are jumping around in a giant mech, shooting rockets that home in on stuff, and a rail gun, and it's like every one of the toys that is normally reserved for sort of one bit of one mission or something else becomes like the entire crux of what this game is about. It is about giving you the most fun things and playing with them.
And also the counter to that is when you're not in the mech, being a pilot is unbelievably great as well. Like the whole opening trailer for this game goes, I know there are giant mechs in it, but like actually it's quite cool to not be in a giant mech, and you're playing through and going like, yeah, sure, whatever, fine. But then it's right, like wall running and jumping and back and forth, like it's a special game.
It's incredible. One other thing I want to pick up about this as well is the level, I forget the name of it because I've got terrible memory, but the level where you're able to flick back and forth between two sort of concurrent timelines gets Yes, Affecting Cause, which is such a like classic video game level name for a level. It justifies it, because I think that level is going to be called back to a lot in this next generation. Maybe I'll eat my words, but you look at what something like Ratchet and Clank is doing with the SSD, with the new solid state drive, and the fact that you can kind of jump between all these worlds very quickly. I think Titanfall 2 is really sort of laid the foundation for that as a concept, and might be something that gets brought in quite regularly as a gimmick now with the fast loading times. And it nailed it so well, right?
That's the Mario level. That's basically a Mario Galaxy level that they just stuck in the middle of the game. It's just, incredible.
Melinda, you've played this too, right?
Yeah.
Are you on the Titanfall 2 fan squad?
The problem for me is like that Titanfall 2 for me is essentially a man game. It's like I'm sorry, but it's one of those games, and this actually applies to Uncharted as well. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, a man came up with this because that's what they want to do. They want to be in a giant mech, they want to be a knight, they want to be like an Indiana Jones type person, maybe a samurai as well. You know, it's just one of those things where you're like, oh, you know, no one else did this before. I thought this was like a mainstay of video game design, that you had to have someone in a mech just going pew 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 all the time. But it's incredibly difficult for me because there were people who said, you know, play this if you don't like first-person shooters, and you're just gonna love it. And then that just didn't work for me. And everyone was like, no, you just need to get to that point, you know, that level that you just described. So many people were just like, if you see that, it's going to change your life forever. And I'm so sorry. I love people talking about this. To me, the wall running, I needed hours to actually run along a wall. It hurt me. So sorry.
Okay, well that's Titanfall 2. Incidentally, the only first-person shooter in our top 10. And again, that is there, I think, because people miss first-person shooter campaigns. There haven't been many good ones this generation, and that's definitely probably the best one that came out. Another big stylistic jump to our number 4, and that is Kentucky Route Zero. Sam Barlow, who's the developer of Her Story and Telling Lies, said, "The journey along the titular highway plays games with perspective and voice that I've never seen before or since." Melindy, I'm going to go to you on this one.
Yeah, this is the one that Kentucky Route Zero makes me angry, because it's the kind of game that I think when you like stories, you want to have made that one. Like, there's so many people who make games who name that one, since there's been a lot of people who name it at least one sort of, you know, on their giant mood board of inspirations, and yet there is just that one game, and I've not played anything that came close to it since. And there's going to be a Junebug album next month that comes out, and I'm so excited for that album. The only thing that would have excited me more this year is maybe if they dug up Prince and said, oh, he's still alive. But
it is only September.
Yeah, who knows?
Who knows?
But
2020.
But it's again one of those games that has so many small games in it, because, you know, there's a part where you play a text-based game while you're playing this, and then you're playing on like a machine, like a UFO catcher machine. A lot of people who don't like this game, I'm not saying they don't like reading, but you have to be in a certain mood for it. Like, I like it to play it when I'm already quite tired, and when I'm just looking for something to like mellow me out. There's a lot of things that don't happen in the writing, but that you sort of make up for yourself as you're trying to imagine what the world building is like. And there's also quite a lot of things that are actually a bit on the nose, with, you know, how our communities are breaking down, and how the American society isn't what it used to be when it was all about community and stuff that, you know, I can't really understand because I've always been inside and on my computer. But it's really, I wished I could write something that had that mood, where you just want to know more because you don't know what's coming next, and you know it's going to be something interesting nevertheless.
Did you play it as the episodes came out, or did you play it all in one go?
I played it when, actually this is a bit embarrassing because I didn't play it until Donna told me to play it, which was when it was featured in the VNA exhibit.
Oh yeah,
right.
A couple of years ago.
And he was like, oh, you know, there's this painting and they got it for the exhibit. And I was like, yeah, I totally know what you're talking about. And I had no idea. And I wrote this whole article about the painting without having seen the game. And then I went to the exhibition, and that too was completely lost on me, because they have, like, at the exhibition, they had one of the phones. That is an integral part of, I think, was it episode 4 or one of the intermediate episodes, and is there a phone there? I don't get it. And then me and my friend were like, oh, they have a phone at a public exhibition, and imagine how many people already touched that and stuff. After that, because I didn't have a PC that would run it, after that I actually went out and played it. So I guess I'm missing a bit of the magic of waiting several years for your in-game episodes. But
part of it, so I played it all in one go when the TV edition came out. What was it, start of this year? And part of me wishes I'd experienced it over the time, because it actually spanned the whole of the length of this console generation. Part of me is also glad that I didn't, because they started out releasing things and it just went at an exponentially slower pace as they went on. So by the end of it, there was like 4 years in between episodes. It's a really, really fascinating game. Very a very memorable mood that you take away from it. I felt it reminded me very much of David Lynch, in that there was something that you couldn't, something unarticulated that you couldn't put your finger on about it, but that really lingered with you, and a surrealism that wasn't just about throwing weird images at you, but about throwing like unusual concepts or groups of people. But the bits of it that I really enjoyed the most were, so there's 5 episodes, but there are 4, I think, interstitial episodes, shorter episodes that go in between the main ones that they release for free, and those are the bits of it that I really love. And those take quite different forms. There's one that's like, it's like a first-person experience where you're sitting in the audience of a play almost, or like you're on the edge of the stage of a play while it happens. There's another one when you're like standing backstage at a TV station. There's another one where you're observing people as they explore an art installation. There's a lot of thinking about different forms of art in it, and I thought those were all like tremendously effective. And there's a lot of moments through the main game that are like that as well. But yeah, it's I don't think it's my favorite experiment in indie storytelling this gen, but it's definitely a really memorable and fascinating one. For the next game, number 3, the choice is Outer Wilds, which came out only last year and was Eurogamer's Game of the Year last year. For this one, I'm going to quote Chris Plant, the editor of Polygon. And Chris said, "Filmmaker Christopher Nolan has spent his year trying to untangle the messy questions of time and its impact on us," which is relevant with Tenet in cinemas at the moment. "The ways that time expands and contracts, how it sculpts our memory, the manner in which it dwarfs our lives, and yet to each individual is so precious. For better and worse, Nolan has relied on the same tools as AAA video game makers: superheroes, guns, wars, and NPCs who exist to vomit exposition. I believe the best Nolan-esque experience of this decade wasn't made by Nolan. Outer Wilds, a universe-spanning, time-looping, heartbreaking human drama set across an alien universe, is a marvel and a reminder that small teams can accomplish big things. It's as complex, confounding, even as explosive as a Nolan film, but it trades heavy weaponry and violence for heart and soul." Don, you love this game, don't you?
Oh yeah, I do, and I think Chris just did a lovely. I think of all the games on this list, I've seen this list. Obviously, spoiler. I do think this is the one which will be remembered, and that's even going above what's above it on the list. I think this game is just a spectacular sort of rebalancing of what games can do, and it makes it look so simple. And at the time I was playing this, I was becoming really interested in cooking. And whenever you get into cooking for the first time, you start to realize that one of the most sort of interesting things in the world is just change, something transforming from something to something else. First time I made, I think it's caramel, where you put water and sugar together and then you heat it, but you don't stir it, and you just have to watch it and it slowly turns amber. And this game is just completely about change. It's set in this universe which is on this 20-minute time loop. But all of the elements of this universe go through really dramatic change over the course of that 20 minutes. They're completely transformed. And that just absolutely blew my mind. It really did. And in terms of one of the first things I did in this game was I took off in my little wooden spaceship and I went and landed on a comet. And you're just like, oh, video games, you've finally done it. This is freedom and exploration on a level I'd never thought about. And I keep coming back to it and trying to understand it. And it's a lot of it is just, I don't know, it feels like it's made by aliens in that, like brilliant aliens, and they've sort of given you this gift from the future. It's something else, this game. It really is. It really is.
It does feel like a game that we will fully understand better in 5-10 years time than we do now, which is pretty rare in video games, I think.
We'll get it just before the sun explodes. We'll be like, oh God, that's what that was about.
Chris, did you play this one?
Yeah, I have played it. I haven't played it all the way through, but I sort of played enough to feel like I get it. I think it's interesting what fellow Chris Plant has said about fellow Chris Nolan. About in terms of, I know, right? It's like Inception, right? Chris is within Chris. So I think Chris Plant is actually wrong. I really respect Chris, and I think he has fantastic opinions, and he's a fantastic editor. But I completely disagree with him, because I think that this is fundamentally sort of the opposite of what Nolan does, right? Yeah, it's staying with time, but the key is in what he said at the end about heart and soul, which is, again, being very timely, thinking of something like Tenet, the exact thing that film is missing, and the exact thing that potentially several of Christopher Nolan's films are missing, if you agree with that thing. They're always structurally fantastic, and they're kind of like mechanically, as far as films can be incredibly impressive. But they're usually about like the sort of mechanical process of making films, and again, it's like the marvel is in the process rather than necessarily sort of the end result. Whereas with Outer Worlds, I think the magic of it is that, yeah, the process is really interesting and unusual. The magic of it is that the end result kind of adds up to much more than just a clever gimmick or a clever mechanic. It adds up to something that is genuinely fascinating and insightful and full of heart and full of soul and full of sort of humanity that something like Nolan, in my opinion, as much as I love Nolan's films, is sort of missing. So yeah, I love it. I think it's a wonderful game.
Melinda, any thoughts on Outer Worlds?
I would love it much more if it didn't have that infuriating physics in it, I think. But I also realized that this infuriating physics in it is also very necessary, because sometimes I just fell down somewhere, sometimes all the time, and I fell into something, and then I realized, oh, there's more down here or more up there, and I need to figure out how to get up there, and it's very frustrating to get up there. But then when you make it, it's very much like I actually succeeded at something, and I don't know, at what point it gets just frustrating, because I've seen a lot of people say, like, oh, this is too frustrating for me, I can't do it. And then no matter how often you tell them, but the end result will be worth it, that still won't change their minds. But I think there's a lot to see, and this fundamental idea that you have to go out there and find it yourself is something that I think games experiment with a lot, but then when it comes down to it, they always give you an ability to make it easier for yourself should you want to. And generally, I'm all for that, but this game didn't do that, and that's the whole thing that made it so special in a way, because it just said you have to, whatever it is, you have to look for it yourself, and it might take a lot of time, but you will get there. I believe in you. Now go. And yeah, I think it's sort of a 50-50 thing for me, where I wish I wouldn't have had to review it, because there's always this point where you review something and then you start looking at the clock and thinking, like, I need to figure this out now if I want to be on time with this, and it's really something that you shouldn't rush. I think that's important.
Yeah. It's a game about bumbling, right? That's the way you describe it. I accidentally find it. You bumble your way across the game, right? You bumble into things, and then like the best thing that you found the whole time is completely by accident.
Yeah.
Well, A.L. Rouse said any scientific discovery is like accidentally sitting on a cat. And I think that's probably true. I mean, I've never done that. That'd be awful, but I'm sure it's that's what it's like.
Okay, well, our number 2 game is not about bumbling. It's Bloodborne. Derek Yu, the creator of Spelunky, said, Bloodborne is simply one of the best games ever made, period. It's a masterclass in how to make an action exploration game by the best in the business, with one of the most compelling and frightening worlds I've ever had the pleasure to experience. Now, funnily enough, I don't think any of us on this call are experts in Bloodborne. I have played it a bit. I got as far as, I can't remember his name, one of those infamous bosses that always puts people off. It is definitely an incredible piece of work. It's the Souls-like game that people say is the best Souls-like game, I think, a lot. And I wonder if that isn't because it's the one that has probably diverged furthest. Actually, no, that would be Sekiro now, wouldn't it? If that is even a Souls-like game. But it did some striking things differently to Dark Souls. The most sort of evident of those was that it forced the pace. So Dark Souls is a game in which you can go very slowly, and really the tension in it is between your desire to push ahead and the fact that the best way to play is extremely cautiously behind a shield, inching your way forward. And Bloodborne doesn't really let you do that. So having taught you to go slowly in the Dark Souls games, From in Bloodborne started to teach you to try and pick up the pace with a much more aggressive sort of combo-led combat style. And it is just like, I think all of those games, there's something very perfectly executed about them, as Derek says in his quote, but there's also something that has really spoken to people over the last decade. And we featured Dark Souls in our Games of the Decade, and it was a pretty close run thing between Dark Souls and Bloodborne, which game we would put in. For me, I think Dark Souls was the original and the one that struck the deepest chord. But the menace of them, but also the melancholy of them, and the harshness but fairness of them, I think, are all things that have really spoken to people. Chris, you haven't played this, but you are a recent convert to From games via Sekiro, aren't you?
That is right, yeah. So I suppose the way that I would talk about Bloodborne is that it seems like the perfect middle ground between the original Dark Souls games and Sekiro, and how they are, like you were saying, encouraging you to completely sort of flip the mechanics on their head and come from turtling your way through these games and edging forwards behind a shield that's bigger than you, into being sort of the aggressor. And they make that so hard in Sekiro because you're sort of inevitably the smallest person, and the least sort of intimidating looking. Either something small but it's incredibly fast and aggressive, or it's massive. And you're sort of forced to overcome this psychological barrier of actually you only be successful if you're the aggressor in this situation, pretty much universally across that game. And part of the reason that works so well is because they laid the foundations and they set your expectations with 3 games, the 3 Dark Souls games, plus Demon Souls, and then you had sort of Bloodborne, this almost like a palate cleanser in between the courses, right? Where it's like if you sort of look at them in order, it's like they're sort of sending you a message to say, okay, think about it. Bloodborne, you have to be more aggressive than in Dark Souls. Sekiro, you are playing as a different type of character. You're playing as this sort of ninja as opposed to a knight. And it's like you have to sort of interpret these messages that you're getting from the developer, right, to sort of come out of your shell and sort of take on the front foot. And that wouldn't be possible without Bloodborne there in the middle, sort of introducing people to the concept of aggression, even though that's something we're all familiar with games, right? It's like reintroducing you to the concept of aggression when you've had 3 games explicitly telling you to be on the back foot the entire time. It's the way that the games sit together is just as genius as the games themselves in a way.
I think it's interesting, and something we were saying, that Melindy was just saying about Outer Wilds as a game that like expects you to actually go looking for things. Bloodborne is a game that expects a lot of you as well, and I think it's something that particularly recently people have actually really responded to in games, is to to be asked to step up and to play them. And I think I think that also goes for our number one game, which won't surprise anybody. It's The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. About Breath of the Wild, Keza MacDonald, games editor for The Guardian, said, Breath of the Wild is what Zelda always felt like in my imagination: boundless, mysterious, playful, and secret stuffed. For a series that I've grown up with for 25 years, to surprise me so much was totally unexpected. Chris, I'm going to go back to you on this one because I know you like this game.
Yeah, I love this game. I was introduced to this game through the weirdest lens, which was that it was my first Zelda game, and also that I was writing the guide for it, but specifically the shrine half of our guide. So Matt Reynolds, our guide editor, was doing the walkthrough, and I was doing the shrines. And so I almost only played through this game via the shrines the first time I played it. And so it became what really should have been like a pretty horrible dirge of an experience was actually still fantastic, because even if you just single down to that one thing, that one element of that game, of just hunting down shrines, working your way across the entire map, clearing every single shrine in it, which it ended up doing, it's still just incredibly mysterious, incredibly Moorish, incredibly sort of enticing. They use the environment in such an ingenious way. They use sort of breadcrumbing in such an interesting way. And they make the process of traversal really the fundamental part of the game itself, right? It's secretly, if you like, it's actually the core mechanic of Breath of the Wild is traversal. And so they sort of, it's like quite a literal take on an adventure game, right? Is that like actually you have to learn how to explore effectively and manage these sort of resources in a way that is effective for its way in terms of things that keep you warm or keep you cool or keep you similar to climb or something. That I think is so stunning about it, and that's what made it such a strange experience, but a brilliant one to work through it for guys in this way. Was that I had to get all the way across this entire map as quickly as I possibly could without going through the whole story, because that would take too long. So I had to find these ways to sort of hack my way around this game and play it completely out of order. But you can do that. It is possible to completely work your way through the game in really completely the wrong direction. It's like walking backwards through a sort of one-way street. But it still works.
The thing about this game, there isn't really a wrong direction to play it in, and there's a lot of games that say that, but very few, at least very few with the kind of breadth and the accessibility of Breath of the Wild that can pull it off. I adore it. I unlike you, love Zelda games and have been playing them ever since Ocarina of Time, and have played all the previous ones as well. It is a very different vision for what Zelda could be, and one it's amazing to see Nintendo actually influenced by what's going on outside of it. That rarely happens at Nintendo. They're usually pursuing completely their own thought patterns, but this is the case that they you think the developers of it have probably played Skyrim and The Witcher 3 and maybe even Grand Theft Auto and maybe even Half-Life 2, and they've absorbed stuff from those, but they've interpreted them in their own extremely Nintendo-like way. And freedom is something that I think I want in games, but when I'm confronted with it, I'm often frustrated by it or not motivated by it, I guess, and or I'm simply turned off by the level of jank that usually goes with offering you freedom in a game. Like to have a game that offers you freedom, but that is designed and engineered by Nintendo, so that there is zero jank, and so that it has all of these fascinating systems that react with each other, like the weather, the stamina, the weapon drop system, which I know drove some people crazy, the fact that weapons break and you have to pick up new weapons all the time. But for me, it was like going back to the first time you play Halo with a 2-gun limit, and you're like, okay, I have to drop this one because I've got no ammo for it. I'll just have to use whatever I get next. So you're constantly changing your gameplay style as you go. I loved it, combined with the things that I always love about Zelda, like the beautiful sort of the beautiful vistas, the storybook mystery to it that is simultaneously very childlike, but also sort of mysteriously adult. Reminds you how adult things seem strange to you when you're a child. I don't know how it does that trick, Absolutely none of this, by the way, has anything to do with the story of the game, which is pretty perfunctory, as it usually is in Zelda, with the exception of Link's Awakening. That's another story. But yeah, a wonderful game, and an endlessly rewarding and surprising one. I played it for such a long time. All right, well, thanks everybody for joining us and for listening to this. Before we go, let's just have a quick round. Any games that you were surprised didn't feature in this top 10, Melindy?
I think I'm gonna go Into the Breach, actually, because for me it's a toss-up between Into the Breach, but I saw a lot more people playing and talking about Into the Breach when it came out. So for me, it's either or this or Slay the Spire. But yeah, I just thought Into the Breach would be more popular.
Donman.
I'm always sad when Grow Home isn't on a list. I think that game is just freedom and nature and discovery and sort of movement. It's just wonderful, and I think it's one of the secret games of this generation.
I'm amazed you didn't mention Painty Mob.
I was going to mention Painting Mob, but I thought someone else will mention that. It's fine. That one's covered. It's fine.
The game that literally I've only ever heard you mention. Chris.
I'm going to go with one that I thought Donnan was going to say, which is What Remains of Edith Finch, which I've not had a sort of visceral personal reaction to, as I know some people have, but I still love it. I think that it is absolutely one of the most remarkable games of this generation. I think it is like a very well distilled version of that type of game, that genre. I think it nails that genre, what we'll call a walking simulator, right? Better than pretty much anyone. It doesn't have the sort of the tweeness that people associate with some of them, and the sort of the overly sort of wholesomeness of it. It is dark, but then again, it's not dark in a way that takes itself super seriously. It's not dark in that sort of slightly puerile way that games could be, where it associates darkness with blood and guts or being 18 rating. It's dark in it, but it's thematically dark, and it's just in a way that it knows how to recognize things as being absurd rather than just taking them very seriously and being head on. It tackles some incredible subjects in such an unusual way. Mostly death, if you want me to be explicit about it. I think no game has touched on death in the way that Edith Finch has. I think it's pretty stunning. So yeah, that would be my pick.
There's a lot of other ones that are surprising that didn't feature. Fortnite, Pokemon Go, both super populous games, but games that are much loved by the Eurogamer team as well, genuinely so. They weren't very popular with our panel. They both got like 1 or 2 mentions each. Red Dead Redemption 2 only got 1 mention, pretty widely passed over. There was 1 mention which I cheered for Forza Horizon, like a game that I genuinely would cite as my game of the generation. Just because it just makes me happy every time I play it. Just a joyful game. And yeah, I mentioned Invisible Ink earlier. That would be my niche pick. All right. Well, Melindy, Donnan, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you everybody for watching. Please head over to the site. There's more about our games of generation on the site and more about all the other games that were nominated by our panel. And enjoy the rest of the show. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Hello and welcome to EGX Digital 2020. My name is No Limit Cosplay and today I'll be talking to you about recycling in cosplay. So first of all, let's talk about myself for a little bit, just to let you know a bit more about me and why you should sit and watch me for however long this video lasts. So I'm No Limit Cosplay. I've been cosplaying for about 10 years now almost, and I've done cosplays from all kinds of different series. So I've got costumes from video games, anime, manga, movies and musicals, and today obviously I'm wearing my female Beetlejuice cosplay from the Beetlejuice musical. And I have lots of cosplays that I've worked on which have involved recycled materials. I've also bought cosplay, made cosplay, borrowed cosplay, casual cosplay, all kinds of different cosplay really. So let's get started. So first thing, obviously, this panel will cover how to make parts for your cosplay out of recycled materials, and also how to recycle parts of your cosplay that you may not have actually thought of doing. So we'll cover all that, and as well we'll also cover pieces about general recycling and other little tips like that, as well as where to find your recycled materials. So without any further ado, let's get started on the recycle talk. So first things first, recycling as a umbrella term is where you take an object that either is no longer needed or is useless in its current state, such as damaged or broken, and you repurpose it to become something useful again. Now, obviously, in the general term, recycling is where bottles are taken and then returned back to useless states and then rebuilt to be new bottles, and the cycle kind of continues where the bottle is used, gets sent to recycling centre, manufacturing, and then makes a bottle, and it kind of goes around like that. Now, with recycling as well, there's also people who will take items and recycle them to be more useful things, such as taking a plastic bottle and turning it into a bird feeder. That's one of the most common ones I see online. And all those little crafting hacks that you see, and people make things like that, those are all different ways of recycling. But I'm not going to spend all my time talking about those because obviously you're here to see recycling in cosplay. So cosplay recycling is becoming more and more popular online. It's very much a growing thing with people looking now more for a focus on the environment and how to sort of save the environment. And I've seen a lot of people online, and some people have made some incredible stuff which you could not even tell was made out of recyclable materials. And the main one that I see a lot of people use in recycling for cosplay is cardboard. Now, cardboard is one of the easiest materials to get hold of, if you ask me, and it's pretty much everywhere when you order things online. So if you're anything like we have been in lockdown and during the virus, you might have about 15-20 Amazon boxes just stacked up in a corner over there, ready to be reused or recycled. And this is probably the best time to sort of try and start making things with recycled materials, because like I said, you probably already have quite a lot of Amazon boxes ready to go as it is. So we'll start off by talking about cardboard, and then I might cover a few more materials, and then I'm also going to cover ways to recycle the cosplays themselves, and also ways that you can sort of improve like cosplays overall through recycling pieces. So the start off would be with cardboard again, like I said, and how to go about using it in recycling for cosplay. So the thing is, there are actually no rules as to how you should do it, but I'll be here to obviously give you some tips on that. So the main way that people work with cardboard is that they tend to dismantle the box currently to make it a large, flat, open cardboard rectangle. Usually is rectangle, yeah. So turn it into a cardboard rectangle, and that way you've got a large surface area that you can draw on, paint, work on, map out whatever you need, and that is your working area that you've got to work with. From there, you can either cut out pieces of the cardboard with either a crafting knife or scissors. However, the most recommended to use would be the crafting blades, because they are usually about that big but can be smaller in size, and they are also so easy to store, usually really cheap, and you can buy them in bulk as well. If I remember right, on some places you can buy them in bulk. They also have a obviously more direct and fine edge, which allows you to get right into the crevices when trying to carve out more complicated shapes. And they can also be used on other materials as well, such as expanding foam, which a lot of people tend to use in addition to their cardboard when making a prop or a piece. So obviously when you've got your cardboard square and you've cut out the shape that you need, you can then start putting it together. So a lot of the time I use cardboard to make sort of box figures, box sort of structures, which I can then add pieces onto or put pieces inside to make it more useful for this piece that I'm working on. I also see a lot of people using cardboard when it comes to making blades, swords. Shields is another one that I see a lot of people use cardboard for. And the most impressive one of all that I find is armor. So you can use armor, you can use cardboard even to make armor pieces for your cosplay. Obviously, cardboard can be bent into different shapes, so you can always use it to build shoulder pieces. And it's also really lightweight, so if you are working with armor, obviously you're wearing it all day, cardboard can be a very light solution, and also a cheaper solution if you don't have something like foam. So obviously a lot of the time armor tends to be built with craft foam, but obviously it's a bit more expensive than getting hold of cardboard, unless you ordered the craft foam in cardboard. But yeah, so that is the best ways for cardboard. Another thing when using cardboard in recycling is that, cardboard in cosplay even, is that you can paint on it and work with it and recolor it in any way you like. There is, however, one downside to using cardboard. The downside being that it does get affected by the weather. Obviously, if you go out in cardboard cosplay and you're suddenly hit by a torrential downpour, that cosplay is going to be soggy very quickly. So it's always one thing to be careful of if you are using cardboard. But you can also paint and prime it, so you should be able to also cover it in sealant to stop the paint coming off at any point. The other thing to remember, obviously, is that cardboard can be pretty flimsy and it may need a few layers just to sort of stop it from bending when using it, especially with cardboard swords. I usually have the problem where the box, because obviously the boxes fold together, they'll have these like little bend points, and that can sometimes again go wavy when you're trying to use it. So if using cardboard for a sword, I'd recommend you put like a wooden dowel or metal dowel inside of it, just so it has that structure when you're trying to sort of swing it around and make it look a bit more exciting. Because no one wants to have their prop sort of start bending and breaking on them at an event, so that's not quite ideal. So cardboard obviously being the main recyclable material. You can, however, also use different items in cosplay, such as metal can be recycled into cosplay in certain amounts, and also plastic can be used. So we'll talk a bit more about the metal, because that one's a bit more of an interesting topic. So I'll just grab this. Obviously with your drink cans, since that one. So obviously with drink cans, you've got the entire metal of the can that you can cut out and reuse for different parts of cosplays. Obviously a can is quite small, so you're going to have a lot more of these than cardboard boxes if you're using them for a bigger project. But the metal itself can be used for little plates and scale mail if you cut out the scales individually. Again, could take you a bit of time with something like this. It also is something that you can use to sort of like jewelry and details. You can sort of bend and twist metal into the shapes that you're looking for. And you can also use the ring pulls on the cans for making a chainmail. It's a very popular thing that I've seen online, is that people will take the little loops off the top of the cans and sort of they'll fold them and connect them all together to make a chainmail piece. Haven't seen it being done in a massive quantity, but I think that's because of how many obviously ring pulls you need and also how long it will take to do. It's a very sort of fiddly work on the hand. Now, just like making normal chainmail. Normal chainmail again is very much time consuming. I think you usually need pliers as well for it, so it's a lot of back and forth and working on that. But it is a thing that you can do if you really wanted to make chainmail using your cans that you're at home. But obviously make sure that people do actually have the drinks before you start stealing the ring pulls off them, because could have some problems there if you don't give them a chance to get into the drinks first. So that's one of the main ones that I see a lot of. Obviously plastic again is pretty self-explanatory. You can use the even thin sheet plastic as light diffusing for your light projects. So you can basically take it and put it in between your light and the surface that you're working with, and then cover the light so the light is either coming across dimmer or it's more sort of contained in one area depending on how you use it. You can also recolor plastic sheeting for that sort of thing as well to make the light come through a different color. And you can also use the other kind of plastics, so the more sturdy plastics. Again, they can be used on visors. I see a lot of the time. You can use them on different parts of armors and gloves, weapons as well. You can also reshape plastic through using a heat gun, but depending on the kind of plastic you've got, it might melt. So it can melt down and make a bit of a mess on your countertop if you do start melting plastic. Obviously, the heat can also be used on metals when recycling in cosplay, but what you will need to do when working on those is have a protective surface down just so that you don't burn anything or set anything on fire, because metals and plastics can be hot as while working, so make sure you've got all the protective stuff for that. Okay, so recycling, that's the material recycling covered, but there's obviously other things that you can recycle material wise, such as wood, clay at some points. There's like all these different things that you can use, but those are the main ones that I talk about just because they are the ones I use most. But that's not the only thing that you can use in cosplay when it comes to recycling. You can also recycle different parts of the cosplays you've got. So, with a lot of cosplays, there are some very similar pieces that will be repeated for each cosplay. Most of the time, it tends to be gloves and shoes, and sometimes shirts as well. Sometimes little props and accessories, but most of the time, it tends to be shirts, hand gloves, and shoes. So the thing I find myself doing quite a lot of the time is I will have a set of white gloves, which will originally have been made and bought in for one cosplay, and then I'll find myself using them for numerous different cosplays as I go along. Especially because each time I end up trying to look at making a new cosplay, I'll see if there's anything that I can reuse and that I've already got in. So it saves me buying 6 pairs of shoes for 4 characters when I've already got 1 pair of shoes that I do a job for all of them. Most of the time, like I said, it tends to be gloves. Actually, it's the most common one. But it's usually, with these items, they tend to be block colour items and very simple or obvious items that are very easy to get hold of. Tend to obviously find those on places like Amazon, eBay. Find usually when looking for things like gloves for cosplay, you don't need to go with all the fancy details, as long as you just find a pair of white gloves and then you can add little bits on if needed. Another way that you'll probably see as well is even if the outfit isn't quite right, you can still reuse parts for cosplays. So again, this sort of thing a lot of characters will wear black tailcoats, for example, and if you just have one black tailcoat, you can then sort of add and remove different pieces, such as the badges and emblems that they'll have on the outfit at any time, which kind of allows you to reuse at least one part of the outfit for numerous pieces. It's just a case of adding and changing accessories, and it kind of makes it a lot easier for you and also a lot cheaper in the long run as well. Also very useful if you don't have much space, because it means you can just sort of reuse 1 or 2 pieces at a time and then not have to worry about going back and changing it all and getting numerous versions. So that is the recycling section on reusing different pieces for the same cosplays, but these also the point of recycling a full cosplay. So when you are finished with your cosplay, for example, or it's reached the end of its run and you don't really feel like wearing it anymore, most people end up asking, what do I do with it now? So there is obviously the initial answer, which some people, usually the parents of the cosplayers, will say is just bin it if you're not using it, sort of thing. But obviously you can bin it if you really don't want to do anything else with it, but there are more efficient ways of dealing with not wanted cosplays and parts of cosplays. So the first one would be more of a reusing sort of thing than recycling, but selling. So you can take your cosplay and sell it on if you're not happy with it, or you're finished with it, or don't need it anymore, or if you just need space as well. There are different ways that you can go about selling a cosplay. You can sell a cosplay through, face to face, if you have any friends that you know who want to have that cosplay of you. You can also sell online, and I guess the other one of more recycling and reusing would be to charity shop with your cosplays. So some would say that taking your cosplay to a charity shop is a bit weird, but it's not actually that weird at all. You know, all the charity shops are happy to accept donations, and obviously someone out there, most likely another cosplayer or a fancy dress sort of party, they'll come and pick up these sort of items, and they'll usually be taken out pretty quickly. And it'll also make the charity obviously a lot happier as well. So the main one obviously there was selling. So selling a cosplay can be done online, in person, auction if you really wanted to go and take it to an auction. I suppose you could try and sell it there. Car boot and all that sort of thing. But online is probably one of the most efficient ways of selling a cosplay. You can find on Facebook a lot of little Facebook sales groups which are dedicated for coming in and buying and selling cosplay. A lot of these marketplaces tend to cater for all kinds of cosplay as well, so you can put some online and people will sort of see it and buy it from there. It's also a place where you can buy and sell cosplay props and other little materials as well. The other places that I've seen cosplay go on sale for a lot recently for this sort of, for pre-owned cosplay tends to be Depop and eBay as well. So buying and selling cosplay in that sense is obviously a way to recycle, but it also makes things a lot cheaper for you as well. So if you're trying to get hold of a cosplay, you can help someone else out by buying the cosplay that they're selling. And it also obviously, you're not making another version of the same costume, so it's not using more materials to produce it. So it kind of keeps the world going, it keeps everyone happy in the same way. That is selling. And obviously another way around doing cosplay is sharing cosplays. So you can borrow cosplays off your friends and sort of use each other's cosplays. It kind of, again, it keeps the amount of cosplay going, but doesn't increase the amount of costumes that are made. But that is pretty much all got time to cover on this actually. So I will leave you to the rest of EGX Digital. Thank you.
What is up, everybody? My name is Richard Terrell. I go by Kirby Kid, and you are watching Design from Life, Hard Magic Made Easy, a panel at EGX Digital 2020, brought to you by Design Oriented. Welcome, everybody. The topic and title of today's talk is Designing from Life, Making Hard Magic Easy. We titled it that because we're going to jump into talk about creative arts, creative processes from the viewpoint of creating magic systems. And when we say magic systems, we're really talking about a lot of the creative worlds that authors build. There's all kinds of fictional authors, when we're talking about video games or movies or anything else, right? Creators make these worlds and they fill them with incredible detail and characters, but oftentimes the rules that govern this world, or what we often call magic systems, how they do the supernatural things, and what are the rules that the characters have to abide by, that's really what intrigues us a lot about these books. There's two different categories, right? Hard magic and soft magic. Soft magic is where the rules are very understated, very general, so you really don't get to sit down and piece things together. It's really just for decoration. It's for just the aesthetic part of it, just kind of getting the plot and the characters to move along. But on the opposite end, you have a lot of authors that create hard magic systems, and these have rules. And even when they're not explicitly stated in the story, there are consistencies to the way that the world works. Authors often have the rules written down in front of them so they can check their own ideas by the rules and make sure that everything comes out nice. We love fictional stories for these things, and these different things come in all shapes and sizes. But before we get any deeper into this, we're going to be joined by two of our design-oriented community members. All right, guys, welcome. We are going to have a little chat here about hard magic systems and how that relates to both creating fictional worlds and game design kind of things. So go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Mark.
I'm Crystal.
Oh, I'm Marcus. Hello.
The talk is about magic systems, and we kind of had this talk before, so that's kind of why we wanted to turn into a panel. And things get really interesting when we start getting a really clear idea of what these magic systems are and how they work. I know, Marcus, you came up with a bunch of examples. Can you tell us a few examples of magic systems in fiction that you might think fit the bill, right? That might be particularly interesting to study.
Anime in general, the shonen genre anime has a lot of hard magic systems, hard power-up system, power level systems. Stretches from everything from Naruto to Hunter x Hunter. Naruto in particular, its power, its magic is called chakra. It's a special energy that builds in the body. And I guess the most important thing to kind of realize about whatever you want to call your system is it's not so much what the initial rules are, especially for the animes, it's how you use those rules. So you can call them elemental affinities, right? Like fire beats wind, and then wind beats ground, and so on and so on. Or you just call it anything else, like, special beats enhance, and enhance beats blocking, right? You can call them anything, but what's important is the relationship between all those things on the pyramid, things on the pentagon, rings on the circle. The relationship is what matters. And how you express those relationships is what people cue into. They really don't care. You need your hard magic system to keep things straight in your mind, but what the viewers and the readers react to is the way how those rules interplay with common events, or between characters, or between common scenarios. So it allows the viewer to compare, contrast strengths, weaknesses, tactics, strategies, and whatnot.
Yeah.
So in Naruto in particular, you have that chakra, which is what they call magic. But with that chakra, they all do a base level series of techniques, climbing trees, enhanced running, enhanced strength, and things like that. But those particular traits are expressed differently across the characters. With those differences is how expresses how a battle may go in one direction versus another.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many details that people love picking apart in animes and manga and different stories like this, but there's also on the opposite end soft magic, and usually if you're an author you have to pick one or the other. There's kind of an entire Star Wars debacle where people got mad at the explanation on how the Force works, right? Everyone loved Star Wars for years and years and years, and all of a sudden somebody comes up and says, hey, they're metachlorians. If you go, no, I don't need that, I don't want to think about that. That's a really interesting case in and of itself. Mark and Crystal, I know that you've read some interesting books and seen how certain anime movies have interpreted these books in terms of their magic systems, and how that works one way for films and other ways for written narratives. So if you have any details on that, let us know.
Yeah, so one of my favorite authors is Diana Wynne Jones. She wrote Howl's Moving Castle, which became a really popular anime movie by Miyazaki. Her way of doing magic system is often very, I don't know, like understated. It's just kind of a natural part of the world. So Sophie, the main character, she does magic. She doesn't know she's doing it by just talking to things. So when she's doing hats, making hats, then she just talks to them like, "Oh, you're so beautiful," or "Oh, you'll have to marry money." And then suddenly the people who buy those hats, that's what happens to those people. They become really beautiful, or they marry someone who's very rich. And then, she just always is kind of chatting while she's doing her work. So one time she's mending one of Howl's cloaks that she broke, and she ripped apart. And she's mending it, and she's like, "Oh, you're just made to bring in girls." And she finds out later that she actually ended up enchanting it when she was sewing. She was literally sewing the magic into the seams. So it's really quite interesting. And then in the movie, they make it, so I think they focus less on that and more just like, yeah, it's magic because it's magic. And I think they focus a little more on Howl's magic and Calcifer's magic more than Sophie's. But in the book, Sophie's is more focused on because she starts the book thinking that she's doomed to failure because she's the oldest of 3 children, which in fairy tales means she's going to fail. But she ends up being the most magical out of all of her sisters and ends up marrying Wizard Howl.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I think is interesting about a lot of Diana Wynne Jones books too, is a lot of times, oftentimes it involves a character sort of discovering their magic, and at the beginning of the book, they often are performing magic by doing these basic everyday tasks, and they don't even realize it. So like you have Sophie talking to the hats or sewing magic into it. I know in Charmed Life, Cat often does magic without realizing it. I feel like that's a very common theme, is these people, they have this magical ability and it comes out just by doing their normal everyday actions, and they just don't even realize what's happening at first.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think shout outs to Harry Potter for being another fantastic example of what you might call hard magic. There's very specific classes that they take with very specific subjects. They have very specific histories. They have very specific ways of these things and ingredients and spells to interact and do magical things from there. And yet another example of Harry Potter doing magic without knowing it, right? He was a parcel tongue, listening and talking to snakes, making a glass disappear, falling through, stuff like that. The classic "You're a wizard, Harry" is really a perfect line to encapsulate this idea that there are amazing things that can happen in the world, and you don't have to know about them explicitly to interact with them, to believe in them, to see them happen. And that's kind of why we love the discovery of magic systems a lot in fiction. My favorite superhero stories are almost always the origin stories. It's always that point where they're like, "What's happening? Spiderwebs shoot out of their arms," kind of a thing. And they are Spider-Man, even if they don't know it. And it's really interesting to see how that plays out. For our purposes, we are talking about what makes all these stories, what makes these systems and rules appealing. And as I was kind of hinting to there, it makes a lot of things more lifelike to us. I mean, we're surrounded in a complex world. There's rules everywhere. There's some we absolutely can't fight, like gravity and things like that. And there's others we like to bend, break, or even skirt behind the law and get away with weird things. And the life is full of that kind of stuff. And I think that's one of my favorite parts about Harry Potter. Not that, they flick their wrists and crazy sparks come out, but that Harry Potter had to go to school, and I was going to school, and I could find that very relatable. And Harry Potter had to take the OWL exams, and I had to take my AP exams, and I found that very relatable. And it's kind of like what Marcus said. It's not this that you throw anything supernatural, otherworldly, or unconventional into your game plot story, whatever. It's that how does it make the characters, how do the characters interact because of those things, and how does it help you relate to the world? The through line here is rules. And when we're talking about hard magic systems, when we're talking about video games, when we're talking about rule-based systems, there's a certain quality here that we're going to drill down into to find out how it works a lot better. And then we're going to try to extrapolate that towards writing fiction, writing hard magic systems, and video games and beyond. A lot of us consume art all the time. We play a lot of games, we watch a lot of movies, we read a lot of books. But from the point of view of the creator, which is kind of where we're going to step into, we need to figure out how to go from zero to I have this amazing magic system / story that everybody loves and wants to imitate and play around with at Halloween. So when we're starting at zero, my advice to everyone always is draw from your real life experiences. I went through a lot of workshops and classes studying creative writing and just seeing how important it is to draw from your real life experiences. Whenever you do, for some reason, all the details are more rich. All the details make a lot more sense. All the details are more relatable, and there's a certain quality of believability and voice to it. Now, it's not magic, right? The thing that is unbelievable about it is that the world is complex, and simply having a first-hand experience gives you the way things smell, the way things feel, the way that your brain kind of remembers the event, the way that the event looks like from a first person from your point of view, and all these other super rich details that make up your actual memories, the actual way your brain works. So when you're going to turn around and make something out of the stuff in your brain, you go with the strongest, most detailed stuff up in your head, the ideas, and then you project it outward into the story. So it only makes sense that people can write better from things that actually happen to them. If you talk to someone who's like, "Hey, how was your day?" and they tell you, you actually believe them, right? Because they just had a day at work. They come home, they tell you, and there's a lot of things they'll just say without even thinking that speaks to the believability and the consistency of the truth that they lived. So I always advise people, draw from life. You have to. And here's where the interesting part comes in. How do you draw from life when you're making something make-believe, right? Fictional, something that doesn't exist, something that's otherworldly or supernatural. And as we're zooming in on this concept, we're really understanding that rules are at the core of everything. Rules are actually what create believability. Rules are actually what create structure and form and consistency across many, many, many different actions. And that those rules are what we sort of, example by example, feel the edges of, and that's what we create, what basically creates our believability in fictional things. So to prove this, we've got something really interesting here. We're going to show you a clip of me making Kung Pao chicken, and we're going to walk the process from how do you go from any random real life experience to, wow, this is magical, fantastical, and completely interesting and believable. So we're going to walk you through the whole process, but it all starts with this. here are some of the ways that I spun up my own magic system out of my own personal experience making Kung Pao chicken, a hobby and an activity that I really love doing. So I think I broke down the magic system into three main parts. One is where you mix and make the sauce. Two is where you cut and marinate the chicken, and three is where you coat and cook in hot oil, and then you combine it all, right? So I'm like, well, what if this was an interesting like potion system or a magic-based system in that when you're concocting things, right? So I thought, okay, based on the chicken metaphor, the chicken experience, I translate that as every spell in my new magical system is made by combining two halves. Everything is always in a dyad, if you will, a binary. One half is always something that's dangerous and deadly, and the other half is always something that is life-giving. And this means that whenever anyone goes out to create a potion, it always requires a certain level of skill, precision, and knowledge, because you could kill yourself, right? Like you're dealing with dangerous stuff. It's kind of like how pretzels in real life are made with lye, and in order to do it in a professional way, you have to get food grade lye, and that substance is highly caustic because I think it's very, very base, not the opposite of acidic, and therefore it could burn you by touching you, and it's poisonous, but they still make pretzels, and pretzels are delicious. You're like, what's going on here? Exactly like that, but different. So because chicken, you handle chicken with care in the kitchen, it's a common thing. You do put it on a different cutting board. You make sure you have gloves or you wash your hands thoroughly. Salmonella is a big deal. That's where I came up with the whole, like, you want the delicious food, but you got to deal with the poison. What are you going to do? Kind of dichotomy. Then I came up with the idea that when mixing ingredients for any half, either the poison half or the non-poison half, the amount you mix is based on dynamic conditions. So this is not like a baking recipe where you follow the rules and you're like, I'm good. This is more like being a chef where you have to taste things as you go along. You have to be aware of the particular batch you have and the balance, and season things accordingly. So I just thought, like, okay, well, if you're making a potion and you got your dangerous thing and your not dangerous thing, life-giving thing, what if you were in a forest? Like, well, in a forest, maybe like, ooh, I'm in a balanced area of nature. I got more green here. Maybe I have to counterbalance that with a little more of the dangerous part. Like, maybe not. Like, just being aware of your surroundings. It's just kind of like something I wanted to bring to the magic system. It's also kind of like cooking if you're baking or cooking at a higher altitude, the different boiling point of water, because of the pressure, all these stupid things that are nearly invisible change how effective you can be when baking, cooking, or doing anything else. And the final idea that I drew from it was the magic potion won't work if the two halves aren't combined in a context of danger or duress. So I took the whole idea of like, well, you throw the chicken, the dangerous part, into the hot oil, and it's like, oil be dangerous. So what if when you're combining the actual ingredients, you're like, whoa, this is kind of dangerous if I get it wrong, explode or whatever. But then I thought, well, what instead of just like, the pot boiled up and you exploded, I thought, what if the context around you that you have to make your magic has to be life context, right? So it's not dangerous because you have a pot of boiling potion or oil. It's dangerous because you're making it, let's say, like in an alleyway, a dark alleyway at night. You're like, ooh, dangerous, right? But that actual real world danger helps, is an actual ingredient for making the potion actually work. And I thought that's really neat because it takes something that's really sort of personal, individualized, and intimate, like, ooh, I'm mixing potions, but it means your world context, your point of view, and the things that you're responding to make that potion is much bigger than just like this little pot in your hand. So yeah, I really love this idea of like just carrying little magic things around and basically observing the world around you to make something very magical and very small in a tiny little package. I mean, the idea can go one way or another. It's just a brainstorming idea, but certainly when you do this on a regular basis, when you are thorough and specific with your design, when you share with the community like we have here at Design Oriented, when you do the right stuff, you get much, much better, much faster, much more confident in producing. You will never feel like your idea is like your one special idea, and if you get it wrong, you're never going to be a creative type. Creativity is a discipline. You practice it every day, you work at it every day, and it comes naturally to you every day. So that's mainly the whole point of this talk. All right, so you saw the whole thing from start to finish. I hope it looks delicious to you. I had a lot of fun making it. I love making food. I love cooking, and a lot of what I love in real life, a lot of those first-hand experiences is what I'm drawing on to try to create a magic system from this crazy cooking experience. But the way we do that is in 4 very simple, I hope, steps. So the first step, always work from what you know, even if you are trying to create something that doesn't exist. That's kind of where we're starting this whole exercise. You need to take your firsthand experiences. Keeping a journal helps. Having a good memory helps. Keeping a journal actually helps you have a good memory. Those things kind of go hand in hand. But making sure that you start with you first is always a really good way to start. Step number 2. The structure of real experiences from real life can be translated. It's the structure that makes things feel real, relatable, complex, and rich. We kind of went over that. So when you're working with an example from real life, this is step number 3, you first need to recognize that the rules and structures exist in real life things that you've already done. So you got to ask yourself, what are the rules? What was I subconsciously abiding by? Like, what are the things I was consciously being aware of? Those are all important. If you want to make a magic system about doing something, it's also important to draw your example from doing something, right? So you don't say, I want to make a magic system where people can shoot, magic and fight crime and fight monsters, but I'm going to compare that to my real life experience of me being bored in this chair. Like, that's not a good experience. That's not a good comparison. Doing something matches with doing something. Feeling something can match with feeling something, and you're looking for parallels. The whole exercise that we're outlining here is about drawing connections between things. We're looking for parallels, we're looking for connections, we're looking for points of commonality. So in this step 3, if you match up the content, the subject matter, and then you kind of really detail for yourself what it is that you're doing. In this case with the Kung Pao chicken, going step by step, manipulating ingredients, and then building a dish that I can eat. But then from there, you have to extract the ideas and the concepts behind the steps, right? Like, why am I doing this? Why couldn't I do this? Why is it important to rinse the chicken? Why is it important to do this step before this step? And if you have experience doing the thing, and more that you draw from your best experiences, you'll have an answer. Well, we only do this because of this, obviously. You don't want to do that because it's salmonella and you'll die, obviously. You always chill this first because otherwise there's lumps, obviously. And to you it's obvious, but even talking out loud or writing those things down will build and build and build a series of interconnected rules, right? It's giving you this really complex framework to work off of. And after you do that, you can ask yourself how, right? Like, yeah, you know that you're making this. Yeah, you know why you should do this, but then what's the exact way that you do it, right? There are plenty of different ways to cut an onion. There are good ways, there are dangerous ways, there are fancy ways, there are fancy devices like a slap chop. How you do it is that last level of specificity, and you draw on your own personal experiences. You don't have to be a chef, you don't have to be a professional, you don't have to be even good at a thing to have a really rich and detailed way of explaining how you do it. And it's all about you. Creative arts expression is all about you expressing it outward. So the fourth and final thing that I want to say about this interesting process is this process of taking something from real life and converting it to something creative, is that once you have broken everything down into the individual steps, the what's, the hows, the whys, and you have the concepts behind it, right? Then you can change just a single element, right? You can just change one element in the entire thing, or maybe like change the type of element. Like, instead of food, you're using rocks, or instead of food, you're using like plants, like real life living plants. You can change it to whatever you want. But when you do that, it gives you the ability to build the structure back up, and you're piggybacking off of the structure that already exists in your mind and the one that you've already detailed. So that's the step-by-step in a nutshell, and we're going to demonstrate it in 3 different examples. So I think Mark and Crystal, we went over this exercise with you, Mark, before, and I think you drew your inspiration from what exactly?
From walking my dog. In particular, here he is. In particular, sort of getting ready to walk him was a lot of it. When you think about the things you do every day, oftentimes you don't think about all the steps involved, but when you start to break it down, it's like, oh yeah, I do go through a very specific approach to getting ready for these things. First of all, usually I try to find the right time of day to take him out. We live in an apartment, we don't have a yard. So I have to take him outside a few times a day so that he can use the bathroom. I usually, hello Dexter. I usually try to plan ahead of time. There are times of the day when I need to leave to go shopping or whatever else. So I usually try to take him out a little while ahead of that time, so that once we come, there'll be time for him to settle down a little bit after we come back inside. Sort of the routine I go through is I start to like get things together. Like I put things in my pockets, I put my keys in my pockets, put my socks on. I'm starting to get ready. Recently it's been hot, so I usually feed him a little bit of food before I take him out. That way his stomach doesn't get upset in the heat. I go over to the front. Usually he doesn't come right away because he's not certain if he's coming or if I'm just leaving by myself. So then I call to him like, Dexter, come on. I call to him. I use a specific tone of voice to talk to him to get his attention. Hello. And then in my case, usually at that point, I realize that I forgot something. And so then I'm like, oh, sorry, Dexter, I need to go grab my keys. Or I need to go grab whatever this is. And he realizes that. And so he usually like waits, is like, is it really time to come? And then I take him outside. I carry him down the stairs because dachshunds potentially have lots of back problems. So I don't want him to using the stairs too much. As I walk him along the streets in Japan are fairly narrow, in our city in particular. And so I have to be careful. I keep myself between him and traffic because he's very small. Cars wouldn't be able to see him very well. Then I usually, he doesn't like when I make him change direction. So I usually try to go in some kind of a loop to come back around to our apartment. And so those are just some of the basic details about what goes on when I walk in. Can you think of anything else in particular?
No. But no.
So yeah, that's great. You can really tell that you are drawing from your own experience. There's a lot of little things that I would have never thought about. I don't have a dog. I used to have some cats, and it's a completely different story about the routines dealing and living with cats. So yeah, that specificity is exactly what we're looking for. And I believe this is where all of your most compelling and creative translations and comparisons will come from. So we did exactly that. We walked through the 4 steps with Mark, and we ended up with a magic system. The details are right here. We're going to try to convert the experience of preparing to walk a dog and walking a dog into a magic system. So go ahead, Mark, and explain what you came up with.
So the basic idea is, as I'm preparing to walk Dexter, I'm sort of getting specific things ready, and then I have to sort of call him over to me and get him on his leash to prepare. So we talked about turning that into summoning like an otherworldly creature, summoning a magical creature. And that can be any kind of creature. In this case, we're taking our dog out of the equation and replacing him with something else. So then we change a few things along the way. Like I think we talked about the first animal that came to my mind. We have a lot of Seahawks in our city. We live near the ocean. And so it's like, okay, we summon a hawk. And so it's like, okay, how does that change things? When you're summoning a hawk, you still need to sort of go through in the magic system. You go through, you ritual. Prepare like the ritual. You go through, you prepare whatever like objects you'll need. Like, oh, for a hawk, maybe you'll need something else. We talked about clipping its wings so it couldn't get away. And then maybe you'd probably want like one of the gauntlets that the people who work with the birds have.
Falconeers, I think.
Falconeers, yeah.
I think it's point for point, too. You mentioned putting things in your pocket, and you're like, well, to summon the creature, you have to put specific objects in your pocket. Something that beckons the bird creature. That's something that does this and that. Like, that's part of the magic summoning. Something that's really easy for games to do, right? You have this in your inventory, shove it into your summoning pockets or whatever, and then that's a part of the process. Then there's the preparation of leaving your apartment we talked a little bit about, where once you summon the creature, it's in your apartment, and then you have to do certain things in order to calm it down, to let it know that you're about to go out. You mentioned something about putting it on a leash in particular, so that when you lead it out, it just doesn't fly away or do whatever else, right? It's just like walking your dog. And then we said, like, you don't even have to have a battle system in this particular fiction, but we thought just the idea of summoning this creature causes all kinds of effects on the world around you, right? So once the creature is in your home, almost like House Moving Castle, where the room started to transform when he got all depressed and it just turned into like slime down the sides. Like, so like effects start happening once you start getting this ritual going. We talked about how in order to complete this summon or whatever, you have to take the creature out of the house, protect it from danger, like avoid certain things, and then make it into an entire summoning loop, because you mentioned going in a circle all the way back to your home, and then the spell is complete, right? And just making those we changed almost nothing. It's just
Yeah,
adding a
yeah.
magical creature in and then doing a lot of the same things, just making it magic themed. And all of a sudden, you have this really cool idea of summoning creatures from the other world and binding them to this world by doing, various steps that video games can really easily translate. Yeah, characters walking around, moving things, inventories, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, when we got to that point, it's just really exciting because I've never seen a game like that. I've never seen anyone do anything like that really, and that's half the point.
Yeah.
You have such rich experiences in your own life, even if they don't seem special, even if they seem routine or mundane. Drawing from those experiences is what is interesting because in a really weird way, if you explain to somebody your boring day, they think it's interesting. It's different from them, and just comparing your life to their life is a point of interest. So even if you think your rituals routine and mundane or ordinary, it's not to somebody else. And adding that tiny creative twist just skyrockets, right? Like people are super interested. I'm interested right now in listening to your story, and I've already heard it twice. That kind of thing. So yeah, any
Yeah,
more
it's true.
details that you might want to add?
As we're out walking our dog, like it does have an effect on the world around us. I have to pay attention to other people since the streets are narrow. Like if someone's coming, sometimes in order not to inconvenience us, they'll like cross the street and go on the other side. Or if they have a dog, I sort of have to follow their lead. I sort of watch how they're reacting. Like if they're looking at our dog and smiling, then it's like, oh, they're probably open. And then we walk up and let our dogs meet each other and sniff each other and interact. And we talk about how the other person's dog is cute and ask how old the other dog is, things like that. But if the person looks nervous, sometimes they'll just move their dog to the other side of the street, or sometimes they just stop their dog right there and wait, and then I move around and avoid it because clearly they're not trusting their dog to be able to socialize well. And so those are just there's a lot of details
Yeah,
you
that's
can
super cool.
go into.
Yeah, I like it a lot. Cool. So that magic system is about taking the experience of walking your dog, walking anyone's dog, but in particular walking Mark and Crystal's dog and turning that into a very specific, unique kind of magic system. Hey, Daxter. So the next one we got up is Marcus. So when we were talking about a magic system for you, some of the experiences you were drawing from is experience working for UPS and loading trucks, all the packages that come through the mail, and they have to be loaded a specific way. They have to be loaded with a specific kind of accuracy, speed. There are safety regulations for loading packages of above X amount of pounds. They call that team lift or whatever. There's all these kinds of things that both keep the employees safe and the whole chain running smoothly. So you were drawing all your details, your particulars around the experience of being a single person in that kind of context. So go ahead and show us what you got.
At UPS, you have your trucks, and then of course specific boxes go in each truck. So each truck is going to be represented by a suit, diamond, spade, heart, clubs, right? And so the boxes come down the belt at random orders, right? So you can have club, heart, spade.
And we can only see the four cards in a row too.
Okay.
Okay.
So everything comes down the belt randomly. So of course you want to match suits so you can deliver them to the trucks easier. So depending on the volume and depending on the rate, right, this becomes harder and harder. So the easiest, right, you're like, oh, if this is right next to this and then the truck is near you, you put it into the truck. Choop. But, right, if you match them over here and the truck is over here, you're like, oh, I have to go across these other two suits before I get to the truck. Does the truck these two suits go to ahead of me or the truck's behind me? If they're behind me, you're like, oh, well, I'm going back. I might as well pick up these two cards or these two boxes. So like, okay. But then when they're in your hand, you're like, oh, I got to remember that the first truck, two boxes are the first two boxes I have, right? And then below that is the second truck, and below that, the third truck. So you have to keep all that in your head while you're walking back and forth across the belt. Speed, box weight, box size, all determines if you can even pick it up correctly. So if you have a heavy box, like, oh, I can only pick up this one spade. And then when you pick up that one spade, all the other boxes are going to go down the belt. You're like, well, got to take this and bring it all the way back down to the belt. If that takes up too much time, you know what? We're just going to let it go. Who cares? Woo! So basically, it's just UPS is a bunch of sequencing with a neat spatial dynamic and a neat weight dynamic.
Yeah.
And of course, the physicality of walking back and forth between the trucks is always going to be a factor.
Cool.
That's pretty much how the basis of the UPS work magic system.
Yeah, so you've told me a lot about your experiences at work, so I know exactly what you're talking about. But even when you explain it like that, I think instantly, oh, puzzle game, right? Action puzzle game, sorting things, figuring out sequencing. That's what puzzle games thrive on. Not only am I a huge fan of Aeroporter, which is a game that's very similar. You're sorting packages in an airport, and you're just trying to line up the colors and get the colors in the right airports, and ton of fun. Just mimicking that real life experience, you get a lot of dynamics and details that you may not ever have thought about otherwise. And when we were talking about converting this into a magic system, we're like, okay, what if this was like a spell casting system, right? And when you are countering a spell from your opponent, their spells, their words coming in are like the boxes, right? And you can either choose to like group them together, sequence them, and spit the words back at them in a certain order, or you can clump them up. And the rules that would govern which words you can clump up, which words that you probably should let go past you, and all that would be exactly how you described it, just based on simple things like whether they match, whether they're the weight. Like you could just do a simple thing like rhyme is matching and weight is word linked, and all of a sudden you got a really complex verbal based magic spell system with interplay too. The interplay between you, the belt, and the trucks can just be like, well, one's representative of one spellcaster and one's representative of the spell counterer. Or you can make a magic system where there are, you know how golf has like caddies and players, right? Or in other things you have like a sniper and a spotter, or all kinds of things like teaming up for your casting would be kind of a neat thing to introduce, right? Like every spellcaster has a scribe and a caster, right? And it's their job to work together. And then one guy should spit in rhymes, right? Like just out of his mouth. And the other guy has to sort them out and organize them. Again, who knows? But that's really cool. And you've got a lot of specific experiences, rules, and dynamics that are already there. And it's just fun to find what little change you can make in order to make the whole thing interesting. So yeah, that's the whole point, right? And it's endless because if you just change it from spellcasting to like bricklaying or whatever, then you've got yourself a weird system for making like magical buildings or buildings that have certain kind of character or integrity. You just go wild, right? But the structure, the rules, and how that affects decision making and whatever, all that's already built in. Going from life, I swear, is so much easier, it's so much better. Designing video games in general is the process of finding solutions to reach defined goals while being aware of the rules and limitations of whatever medium you're working with. That's universal across anything you're trying to design. And even though we created hard magic systems, this approach of studying something, breaking things down, identifying a target, and then changing the specific elements to reach that target can be applied to anything that you want to design, even video games, right? We talked about magic systems, but really, like we said with Marcus's example, that could be a puzzle game, that could be a puzzle system, a battle system, anything. Systems are collections of rules, if you haven't picked up on that yet, and all the ways that you can mix and match and understand rules will only give you more and more flexibility as a designer. But if you want to find out more about the kinds of things we think and the kinds of things we do, we encourage you to join us at Design Oriented. It's our community. But until next time, guys, we're all saying bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Hello, everyone at EGX Digital. I'm Ollie Welsh, editor of Eurogamer, and joining me, I have Digital Foundry's Richard Ledbetter, and we're here to talk about next-gen consoles. The starting point of this discussion was Xbox Series S, but it turns out over the last couple of weeks, basically everything has happened. We've learned price and date for all of the Xbox consoles and the PlayStation 5 consoles, as there's a pair of each of them. We know when they're coming, we know how much it's going to cost us, and we know the worst kept secret in next gen Xbox Series S is indeed real. And its reveal, which was leaked in the first instance, I think was probably the trigger for this avalanche of information and these pricing decisions from Xbox and Sony. So it's been a long summer waiting for this information, but it's good to have it all out in the world finally.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the thing about Series S is that they couldn't announce it without revealing the price, really, because the whole point of it is that it's a cheaper Xbox. And if you're going to reveal a cheaper Xbox, you've basically got to tell people how much the more expensive one is going to cost and then position the cheaper one. So, yeah, a really interesting strategy there where essentially they've cut costs on pretty much every part of the design, but I still think the overall product is actually quite intriguing. So if we look at the cuts, first of all, it starts with the main processor. It's 55% of the size of the Series X, which means that it's a lot cheaper to produce. The smaller a chip it is, the more cheaper it is to produce, the less likely there'll be failures on the production line. So that's the first part of the cost-cutting exercise. But it's all gone on graphics. So essentially, they've scaled down the GPU. Everything else, as far as I know, is basically the same processor, CPU slightly slower, but nothing that I think is going to cause any issues. Secondly, there's the memory, which is my primary concern, where you've gone from a 16 gigabyte machine to a 10 gigabyte machine, 13.5 gigs of usable memory down to 8. That is substantial. And then finally, which I think in terms of quality of life sort of situation, there's the fact that the storage is half the size. So you've got a 500 gigabyte SSD rather than a 1 terabyte SSD. And again, there are concerns there.
100 gigabytes now, like in this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and Call of Duty is like what Modern Warfare is like a 200 gigabyte game now. There are some potential efficiency savings moving into next gen, but man, that's problematic. And again, what we don't know pricing wise is kind of like the satellite costs. So obviously you've got the plug-in 1 terabyte external drive for Series S and X, but we don't know how much it costs. We do know how much expandable storage for PlayStation 5 will cost because it's an off the shelf drive, but it's a high-end one. That's going to be extremely expensive as well. So I think, my takeaway, I mean, obviously the Series S discussion has kind of been eclipsed slightly by the fact that, well, for us, it's the day after the PlayStation 5 price reveal.
That's right, as we record the morning after the night before.
Yeah, so we've got the digital pricing for PlayStation 5 at $399. I mean, that might be a different discussion in of itself, the whole value proposition of these machines now. But I think certainly in Sony's case, they're going to be wanting you to buy the more expensive one.
Why do you think they want you to buy the more expensive one? Do you think they're taking a hit?
Yeah, well, if you think about the vectors for cost saving on the digital PS5, I've just outlined what they are on Series S, which is wholesale cuts across the board. On PlayStation 5, the only cut is the fact you're not getting an optical drive, which, according to my sources, saves them about $25 max on the bill of materials.
And yet the machine is $100 cheaper.
Yeah. So where is that extra money going to come from? How is it going to be paid? Obviously, the fact that you're locked into the digital ecosystem, and then now there's talks of what, $70 games? More, is it that or more? I don't know at the moment.
$70 is the list price for some of the launch games, including Demon's Souls.
Right.
And of course, if you're buying from the PlayStation Store, you've got no choice to pay that full whack unless there's a sale on. Rather than if you're buying physical, you can shop around, look on Amazon where they habitually knock $10, £10 off these prices.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Sony will make much better margins off you in the long run if you have a digital machine, because you're locked into the system, as you say. But it does seem like they're going to take quite a hit on that machine to get it out there at that price point.
Yeah, I mean, we did some sums there back in the day. I mean, they save like $20, $25 on the digital drive, but just to finance a $50 price cut, they've got to basically have 3 games bought digital that would otherwise be bought physical, basically to offset the cost there. But to finance $100, that's a different ball game altogether. Secondly, something that I think is sort of quite interesting on the pricing side of things. Again, it's all about those peripheral costs, the games being more expensive and whatnot. There's a lot going on here. In terms of allocations as well, I mean, how available is the digital edition going to be? There's been reports of the chip yield being lower than expected, meaning that they're putting fewer units out there. Now, if you're Sony, are you going to remove digital edition units and potentially save more money, or are you going to remove the disc version and take more of a hit to get more units sold of the digital? I think they're going to shift towards trying to sell you that more expensive version simply to offset their costs.
Also, they need retailers, and I don't think retailers are going to be as keen on the digital edition as the physical one.
Yeah, there is that as well.
Do you think they always intended to price PS5 digital at $399, or do you think they got bounced into it by the Series S?
It's an interesting question. I think the whole existence of the digital edition in the first place is because they got wind of Series S. I mean, I can't see any other reason why they'd do it, because the economics on making a console in the current situation with semiconductor businesses, it's extremely expensive. The economics are very, very challenging. And then basically they've got to come out and produce a cheaper machine, and the only vector they've got is to remove the drive. So I do think that forced their hands. The whole pricing situation, it's just been like a bizarre spectacle where nobody wanted to tell you how much their products cost until they knew what the other one was doing. It's just quite unseemly in a way. But I think ultimately, the good news is that these machines could have been a lot more expensive. I mean, I think that Microsoft and Sony would have loved to have sold you their new machines for $600. And instead, they're doing it at $500 and lower. And I think ultimately the consumer's the winner there.
Yeah. I think Microsoft decided to go in aggressive, and I think Sony had to respond.
Yeah.
That's my feeling anyway.
Yeah, but good news for the consumer, I think. I'm just still worried about these peripheral costs, the game's getting more expensive, and the cost of what I think will be essential external storage for these machines, or storage upgrades.
Yeah, indeed. I think Microsoft certainly, like, their long-term goal is to just get people into the Xbox ecosystem however they can. And what they want is Game Pass subscribers, right? That's what they're really, really interested in. More than console owners, they want people subscribed to Game Pass.
Yeah.
And they're doing that through a number of avenues. Obviously, you can buy a console. You can also get Game Pass on your PC. Game streaming has just launched on Android devices, and that's another way to get into the Game Pass system. And they have the all-access subscription option for actually buying the console, which comes with Game Pass Ultimate as part of the deal, and actually works out slightly cheaper. This finance-wise buying a console and buying a full 2 years of Game Pass Ultimate and a standalone console, which is an incredible deal. But of course, what they do, that shows their hand. It shows that what they really want is to lock you into that subscription, because they know then that you'll have Game Pass for 2 years, and that for them is a win. And if you're in it for 2 years, you're probably keeping it as well.
Yeah, I think the whole Game Pass situation is fascinating because it's coloured the entire marketing of the machine. If you look at what Sony is doing, it's really traditional. It's a proven model, and it works, which is that you first of all appeal to the core user with games that you've never seen before, that look amazing, that get you genuinely excited, that you feel that you're getting something new. I mean, the Dark Souls stuff we saw last night was incredible.
Yeah.
And the hits just sort of kept on rolling in that presentation. So that's the sort of traditional approach. You appeal to the core user, and then they evangelize it to everybody else. And it worked amazingly for PlayStation 4.
Mm.
And obviously, Microsoft back then tried a different approach there, which I don't need to talk about how spectacularly that failed. But this time around, they're doing something very different, which is, I do think that they're appealing to the mainstream gamer from game one, and they're doing it via Game Pass, which is a proposition. It's massively compelling. And I'm loving the idea that, it could have ramifications really on the Xbox hardware business moving into the next generation. But what they're doing in the here and now is basically saying, look, there's a ton of devices out there that can run these games, and we're going to give you the choice of doing it. And to sweeten the deal, we're going to give you this subscription model that gives you all of our games free on day one. It looks like they're giving you all of the EA games now free on day one. Huge third-party catalog. I love Game Pass. It's revolutionized the way I kind of sample games. The cloud streaming side of things, I'm not sure it's something I'd want to be using day in and day out, but let's say I just want to sort of take a cursory look at the Game Pass catalog. I have instant access to all of it on my phone. This is an entirely different proposition that we're dealing with here. And I think one of the challenges Microsoft has is that as specialists in the enthusiast press, we're kind of used to what works for us and how things have worked in the past. So in that sense, the Sony presentations kind of like manna from heaven, whereas I'm not sure we fully appreciate just how good Game Pass is and how it's going to be sort of appreciated by the audience out there. But I just love the fact, actually thinking about it, I just love the fact that we actually have two separate approaches that seem to both have huge wins in them. And the fact that there is choice.
Over the last couple of weeks, that is very much the narrative of this generation, right? Over the last couple of weeks, we've sort of been sucked into the old school console war, them trading blows, setting their price points, putting comparable products out there. But you're quite right. There are very different visions behind these going on, and it is interesting to see Microsoft leading with something quite different, and Sony trying to hold its line, but also trying to cover what Microsoft is doing. I think you're starting to see hints of that now. It's interesting that they are not quite as hardcore about putting new games on PS5 only as first appeared. So we've learned that Horizon Forbidden West and Sackboy, as well as Spider-Man Miles Morales, are all going to be available on PS4 as well as PS5. And we've also seen their sort of slight Game Pass spoiler, I guess, in the PlayStation Plus collection, I think they're calling it, which is a catalogue of first-party PS4 games. Got to be said, they put out a great number of excellent games on PS4. So, the likes of God of War, Horizon, Days Gone, which will be included with your PlayStation Plus subscription. Although they also have PlayStation Now as well, their streaming service, which is sort of a little off to one side in all of this, and they haven't been talking about it that much. But yeah, it feels like they are trying to cover Microsoft's ground while also, as you say, playing their traditional game of we want to sell boxes and have a nice margin on those boxes. So it's definitely an interesting strategically. But you're right, it's great to have these two different approaches. And in the short term, I think we're going to see some wonderful exclusives from Sony, which really show off what a next-gen machine can do. I think it might take longer before we see that from Xbox because they're thinking so much more holistically about this. But in the short term from Xbox, you have this just incredible value proposition. And I think you saw that when Series S was revealed, and also the all access pricing was revealed last week, and people started to put the numbers together in their heads, and they were like, wait, I can have a next gen console, or at least a console that will play the next gen games for this much money, and then I just pay the subscription and I have all of the games, like all of the games. It's really compelling to people, and obviously in the current economic climate, value is something that really matters. So I think Microsoft has done surprisingly well, I think, because earlier in the summer we were a little underwhelmed by the Series X reveal and the games they had to show then. Halo didn't look great, then it got delayed. Things were looking a little bit hairy, but they've come out of the last week, despite being bounced into it by a leak, really well, I think.
Yeah, the leak was basically a week ahead of schedule because we'd signed the NDAs and the embargo. We knew it was coming on the 16th or the 17th. So, everything was kind of laid out. We knew it was happening, but for whatever reason, those plans were leaked, a week ahead of time. And I think, Microsoft kind of deserved kudos for the way they reacted to it. I know the way these guys work, that the concept of having all of those plans ruined, it would have been a massive blow to them. So to actually be that agile that quickly, I think it was a holiday weekend as well, possibly. So the fact that they actually were able to respond and do so positively, I think went down really well. But I also think just the core message that they had to get out, as you say, is very, very strong. I mean, I find I've always been fascinated by weaker hardware, simply because it's interesting to see just how close it gets to the full fat experience. And the Switch there is a classic example, but Series S is on a different level because it is essentially the memory and the GPU that sets it apart from Series X. And what I love about it, over and above the price point, first of all, when I was at Microsoft in March, I was kind of a bit, telling them I was a bit iffy about the fact that consoles are getting bigger and consuming a lot more power. Kind of seemed counter to the ethos of what we kind of want from a console, which is like a nice little small box that sits next to your TV and gives you a great gaming experience. And then they revealed the Series S, and it was like, this really hits the spot. It looks pretty awesome. And I'm also
the best machine of the lot, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I also think they were, because we had a discussion over lunch. I was talking about what I'm doing at home to reduce my carbon footprint, and they were talking about when they revealed the Series S, it was like, well, this is what we're doing for sustainability. It's a much lower power machine. So I'm going to be interested to see just how much of how low the power consumption is on it, but it should be pretty low. So that's another angle to it. But I think over and above my environmental sensibilities, it's just the fact that we've got a nice small console box that is going to be able to play all the new games. Developer response to it has been kind of mixed, I'd say, because whichever way you slice it, I think the GPU scalability of side of things isn't a problem. The memory side of things, I did speak to the Microsoft chief architect of Xbox the other day, and we went through how memory scales between 1080p, 1440p, and 4K resolutions. He seems to think that the sums add up there, but I think it's going to be, basically the developers are going to have the last word there.
So their argument, right, is that you don't need the power if you're not pushing 4K.
Yeah.
And you don't need the memory if you don't need 4K texture.
Yeah,
right?
the way that's it. It's not just the textures, it's as well. It's basically the way that rendering is done these days. Deferred renderers use this thing called a G buffer, which basically contains a whole bunch of properties relating to textures and their materials and how they interact with light. And those buffers, the G buffer, it's enormous. And, as you reduce resolution, it eases up on memory massively. And that's how they think that the 8 gigabytes of available memory will work out. So, I mean, I'm going to be interested to see how that plays out. But, I'm hearing a lot of interesting things about the consoles and how the developers are getting on with them. I just think they're really happy to be working on new hardware. And obviously the more higher end engine developers are really happy to have stuff like hardware accelerated ray tracing to get their teeth into. So a lot of opportunities there. And I think even sort of pretty close to launch, you're going to be seeing some really nice stuff there.
The big question, well, actually, there's two big questions about Series S. The first one I don't think we can properly answer yet, which is it really a next-gen console?
I would say it is. I think that can be answered fairly conclusively, because if you look at what the gains are, where the leaps are, CPU is virtually the same as Series X. You do have solid state storage attached to the system. It's not a mechanical hard drive.
This is going to be a big deal on both
Yeah.
Xbox and PS5, isn't it? And
Yeah.
they're both stressing it quite. These fast load times, they're both stressing it quite.
Well, there is an irony with Series S, which is that because it has the same SSD but less memory, there will be scenarios, and I'd imagine quite a lot of them, where the Series S will be faster loading than the Series X.
Amazing.
I mean, it's probably not a major marketing point that Microsoft want to get out there, but it is the reality of using the same storage with less memory. Yeah. But obviously the question is what the impact is going to be on the experience. I honestly think it will be lower quality textures. Microsoft have got this, they call it shader feedback sampling, which essentially scales textures and basically doesn't need to load in every single iteration of every single texture. It can stream in just the ones that are needed to display. They're calling it a multiplier on system memory. That will help. The extent to which it will help the Series S in particular, I don't know. But this is a modern GPU. It has all of the features of Series X. The only issue, I think, GPU-wise, I'd be concerned about beyond resolution is ray tracing, because that requires quite a lot of system resources beyond the GPU. So you've already got a limited GPU there. It's also heavy on memory bandwidth, which the Series S isn't so great on. And that's going to be a bit of a challenge for them. I wouldn't be surprised to see Series X games that have ray tracing and Series S ones that don't. But yeah, I guess it's down to the developers to scale that. But I'm pretty sure that Microsoft will allow them to run with ray tracing on X and not on S if that's what it takes to get the game working.
So I know ray tracing is something you've been evangelizing for a couple of years at Digital Foundry.
Sure.
Do you want to give the quick sort of 2-minute pitch on what it does and why you want it in your games?
Well, what it does is essentially bring more of an idea of realism into rendering, okay? And the funny thing is that developers have got really good at faking realistic lighting in their games, but it is faked. And to begin with, the differences that we're seeing with ray-traced reflections are quite subtle, but if you look at something like Metro Exodus, where the entire illumination, the whole global illumination system is based on ray tracing, it just looks so much better. Secondly, it's a technology that can be used for more than just visuals. It can be used for audio, it can be used for a whole bunch of stuff. And what I actually really like about it is that I think both of the platform holders are giving developers direct low-level access to the ray tracing hardware to do with it whatever they want. So I think this is basically a fascinating new tool that's in the toolbox for developers to play with. But I think in the short term, there's going to be a lot of shininess and a lot of reflections, possibly big puddles.
Yep. Everybody loves a big puddle.
Yeah. But, just stuff like shadows can be done much more effectively in ray tracing.
Right.
And to begin with, I suspect that it will be kind of like more of a subtle change in many respects, because, a lot of game engines will be built for cross-gen. But once developers have got to grips with ray tracing, then we'll see some interesting stuff. But I did note last night in the PlayStation 5 reveal showcase, they showed a special edition of Devil May Cry. And they really went, the reflections in Devil May Cry 5 on the current gen systems are awful. And this whole trailer just seemed to be like, hey, look at our reflections. They're ray traced now, and they look really awesome. And I think they're doing for PlayStation 5. I think Alex told me this, that they're doing a 1080p 60 mode with ray tracing. They're doing a 4K 30 mode with ray tracing, or there's a 120 frames per second mode being mooted without it. So that's the other thing I kind of like about the whole ray tracing thing, is that a lot of developers in the cross-gen era are giving the users choice as to whether they want to see these effects or whether they just want to see the GPU being used for all-out brute force frame rate.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing the same thing with Spider-Man Miles Morales. They've announced a 60 frames per second mode. I can't imagine ray tracing being in that. Might be wrong. But yeah, essentially, I think ray tracing is quite an exciting technology, and it's just the beginning. And I think that was over 2 minutes. So I'm sorry about that.
That's all right. Here's another question on Series S. Why is Microsoft making Series S? Why does it exist? Because we haven't. This is the first time we've seen this. Obviously, over the life of a console generation, you get variations in the hardware. You know, more recently we've seen the Xbox One X and the PS4 Pro come out and exist alongside their less powerful counterparts. Why is this happening right at the start of the console generation? You're getting these two tiers. It's because
the costs of making a console are scaling up, not down. That's the big problem here. And again, this is something I was talking about with Andrew Goosen, the architect of the Xbox Series SX. As I said, the economic situation in creating a console is looking pretty bleak for this generation. Memory hasn't really reduced that much in price. That's why we aren't seeing generational leap in memory this time around. It's a 2x multiplier. Last time around we had 8x. It's a staggering situation. Basically, it's they can't give you more memory because it's too expensive. And then there's basically, Moore's law, which is all about a doubling of transistor density every 18 months. That's kind of become a somewhat elastic 18 months. But the fact is that the shrinks, the idea of cramming more logic onto a piece of silicon, that is still happening. What isn't happening is cost reductions. It's the cost per transistor. So these consoles are expensive now, and typically there'd be a couple of years later you'd get a slim model which would be using a smaller chip that's going to be cheaper to produce. Now, what if that smaller chip isn't cheaper to produce? You'd still get power efficiency savings and whatnot, but your console isn't going to get cheaper. So, and again, I think Microsoft cite memory is only reducing in price year on year by 5%. So the whole idea that you can buy into a console at $500 at launch, but you don't need to wait a couple of years and it'll be $300. That isn't the economic outlook that Microsoft think is going to happen now. And if that's the case, then, they need to take radical action, and Series S is their solution to that by basically giving you the cheaper console in the here and now, but with caveats in place, which is basically that it's going to be a less capable machine. So that's the reason why we've got two machines. And they've outlined the whole situation with the semiconductor business quite strongly. Whereas Sony kind of want to keep you at arm's length. So yeah, I'm just going to be really interested to see how, first of all, two things. First of all, how is this generation going to play out? What if the consoles don't get cheaper? According to Microsoft, the only thing that is going to get significantly cheaper is solid state storage. Now, that does present some potential cost savings, not a huge amount, but it may well be the case that instead of having a 1 terabyte Series X a couple of years, you'd have a 2 terabyte one as opposed, you wouldn't for the same price. Yeah. That's the first side of the equation, which is, scaling of costs over time. It may not happen. Where does that leave us? Well, we've got Series S. But I think what worries me more is if the cost per transistor is not reducing, then where does that leave the next generation? Because you're going to be pegged at the same performance level as the current generation at the current prices with very limited scalability in cost reductions. So this is kind of a challenge that we're already seeing played out in certain parts of the hardware business. For example, you might have noticed that your iPhone and your high-end Samsung Galaxy, they're not getting cheaper, are they? They're producing cheaper versions that you can buy into, but the flagships are now north of $1,000. This is the environment that the console manufacturers have got to play in as well. It's going to require some innovative solutions, and it's also going to affect the PC graphics hardware side of things as well, CPUs as well. So there's a big challenge ahead. According to Microsoft, Moore's law is alive and well. You'll be able to produce smaller processors, but they're not going to be cheaper. So yeah, this is a bit of a worry for me, I'll tell you.
Yeah, I'm sure Microsoft are betting on it all going into the cloud anyway, but
well, that's the other thing.
The way off.
the cloud situation I find fascinating because Sony have got a partnership with Microsoft. So if and the reason that they've cited for this is basically, global reach. The Azure data centers are everywhere. They don't, Sony can buy into that infrastructure and they do it via Microsoft. But there's been a question that's been sort of bothering me about the whole Sony Microsoft deal for a while now, which is, well, put simply, are they going to stack Azure data centers with PlayStation 5 hardware in the way that they did with PlayStation Now, with PS3 and PS4? Are they going to do that? I mean, why would they do that if Microsoft already have Series X silicon in every single one of those data centers? It's basically doubling up on what is effectively very, very similar technology. The only real difference is on the consumer units is the SSD side of things, which isn't going to be a problem for server level storage. So, I just think that, we could be looking at a rich irony coming up in years from now, where we do start to see PlayStation 5 games being delivered via the Microsoft Azure cloud, and potentially they could be delivered via either Azure PC silicon or, in the richest of ironies, Series X silicon, which would be quite remarkable. It would certainly put our platform comparisons in a new light, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, it would be crazy to us, but to a regular man out there, they engage with a brand, right? They engage with the brand of Xbox, the brand of PlayStation. They're just going to be getting that. And I don't think anybody knows or cares that when they're watching a Netflix video, it's actually streaming off an Amazon server.
Sure.
Same one that serves them their Amazon Prime Video, these supposedly competing services. That's invisible to them and kind of no consequence. And I think Microsoft sees that and is betting on it. And obviously, as the owners of the servers, they're well placed for it. I think Sony has a bit of a different game to play, but they have an incredibly strong brand in PlayStation, arguably a much stronger one than Xbox, and that can only serve them well in a scenario where what people are doing is engaging with brands, I think.
Yeah, the future of the console. I have no idea how it's all going to play out, but I'll tell you how it's played out over the last two generations, which is effectively that. So, and if you look at it at a global level, it's almost ridiculous that Sony and Microsoft have gone to AMD to create bespoke consoles, which are effectively based on the same CPU and GPU architectures. They've doubled up. They've each invested hundreds of millions of dollars in creating machines that, there are some variances, but they have much more in common than they do versus the differences. So, maybe a potential cost reduction in future is simply to have a generic box, a generic piece of console hardware, and, you fire it up and you either install your PlayStation app your PlayStation system level software or your Xbox system level software, or both. I think that would be an amazing way to actually sort of just double down on the platform rather than the hardware.
Yeah.
And I mean, also we're seeing Sony move into the PC space. I think what was quite amusing for me last night from the PlayStation 5 thing was that just the sheer amount of confusion that's been generated as to whether Sony first-party games are going to be appearing on PC or not, because if their transmissions are saying that they are, then there's sort of massive backpedaling going on, and mistakes apparently being made, and but sooner or later it's surely got to end up on PC.
Yeah, we've already seen Horizon Zero Dawn, haven't we?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we should wrap this up quite soon. I've got two last questions for you. One is about Series S, and it is it going to hold back next gen games? Are developers having to keep the Series S SKU in mind when making their games? Is it going to hold back what they're doing, particularly third parties, obviously multi-platform games?
This is a question that's going to be answered in the fullness of time. So in the short term, no, I don't think. I think it could be mildly inconvenient in the short term. But bottom line is for multi-platform development, which, essentially Microsoft itself is now a multi-platform developer. The whole concept of engine scalability has to work across so many different hardware SKUs. Just even if you factor in PC, you don't even need to factor in Xbox One, legacy Xbox One systems. Games have inherently got to be scalable to work on PC. So in that respect, I don't think it's going to be a problem for Series S. And Microsoft have actually built something they call the GDK, which is a development environment which will allow the same codes to be run on Xbox and PC. So I think they're in a good place there, assuming that the quality of the GDK is there, of course. And so in the short term, I don't see it being a problem because, we've got this whole concept at the moment of cross-gen being possibly the most extended one we've ever had, simply because there's over 110 million PlayStation 4 systems out there that you just can't ignore. So in the short term, I don't really see a problem for Series S over and above some level of developer inconvenience. In the longer term, though, I don't know. Every time a weaker console has come out, historically, it has not fared well across the entirety of a console generation. Most recent example is, of course, the Xbox One /One S, which is really struggling now to keep up with PlayStation 4 Pro and Xbox One X. My worry is that the same fate could befall the Series S as developers really push the hardware. Memory is so important; it really is, and I'm not, as I said, I'm not too concerned about the GPU in the S because scaling back resolution is such a win. But the memory side of things, that is my concern. So I think in the short term, not a problem. In the longer term,
time maybe. Yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
And finally, brass tacks, Series X, PlayStation 5, which machine is more powerful?
I knew you were going to ask me that. Well, okay, there are two ways to look at this. First of all, I can tell you every single developer I've spoken to developing for PlayStation 5 has been evangelizing how easy it is to work for. It's essentially the same development environment as PlayStation 4, and you scale up from there for the new power, the new features and whatnot. I can't stress enough how happy developers seem to be with this situation. Now, specs-wise, Xbox Series X, there's been a lot of conjecture about how, Sony's boost clock brings it into contention against Series X, how bafflingly to me, how a solid-state storage drive with higher bandwidth is going to make for better graphics. If you look at the numbers, there is simply no doubt that the Xbox Series X is, on paper, the more powerful machine. However, again, speaking to developers, the development environment that they're dealing with, some people seem to be extremely happy with it. Other people are having problems with it because they've moved away from what was previously the XDK, which was specific for Xbox, to the GDK, which is a more general development environment for PC and for Xbox. And even Xbox One is encompassed by the GDK. So, you know, the long-term win with the GDK is that you're going to be able to develop for it and deploy across all of these different systems. But in the short term, I have heard developers having some problems with it. And whether that is all going to sort of manifest in final games is the big question. So, yeah, it's really difficult to call at this moment. And I think ultimately the specs issue is an interesting one, but it's all going to be down to the final software. It always is. I mean, this is why we haven't really done a huge amount of PS5 versus Series S/X videos on our channel or articles on Eurogamer, because those specs are out there now. You know, it's now down to the developers to deliver the software and the games, the experience there. That's the important thing. That's the crucial thing. And obviously we'll be looking at that in incredible depth once we have hardware and software.
Yeah, all eyes on the second week of November.
Isn't it third week or something for Europe for PS5?
Yeah, for Europe for PS5. Hopefully we'll get at least one before then.
Hopefully, yeah. But I am predicting a lot of rage because obviously Digital Foundry coverage is, you know, all of our guys are in Europe. So we could have a lag in access to hardware compared to actual users in America.
Let's hope not. I certainly wasn't expecting all of the consoles to release in the same week, which is in the US at least, which is that's going to be a big week. Can't wait. Really looking forward to it. That was a fantastic chat, Rich. Thanks very much. Thanks everybody for watching.